Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to the rest of you all. Welcome to another episode of Bitcoin Magazine Live. I am your host, Q, coming to you yet again from my mother's basement. Shout out my boy, Michael Tenney, for actually owning his basement. I found out today how little equity I actually have in this basement. So I digress. P, how goes it, my dude?
As always, my friend, it goes fantastically. Just hanging out, doing the thing, playing around with these AI image generation tools. They're fucking wild, as you know. But let's talk about news and notes.
We've got a jam-packed episode for you all today. News and notes, which we'll kick off in just a moment. A surprise interview guest for everyone, including both P and myself. We have no idea who's coming on the show today. Apologies. We have had so many emergencies, fires. Apparently the UK is on fire. My heart goes out to everyone out there who's dealing with, the desert heat, as I like to call it. Drink plenty of water, stay cool, dip your head in the pool. You know the drill. And then, of course, we have a new episode of Fedwatch. We'll have Ansel and CK breaking things down for us. But let's kick things off with some news and notes. For a couple lighthearted stories, because, we like to have fun on this show. We have I hope I pronounce her name properly. Luana Pinheiro will become the first female UFC fighter and first Latin American athlete to receive her paycheck in Bitcoin. We will be having a Twitter Spaces with her and the guys over at Bitwage to discuss this latest partnership. I apologize for the ESPN-esque stat of first female, first Latin American. Although I think that's first female Latin American, not first Latin American, because they had a different fighter, I believe her boyfriend, who was paid in Bitcoin. So it's exciting stuff. I think this is a net positive for pushing Bitcoin forward, for normalizing it, for the UFC and those fighters. I mean, neither of us can talk to it better than our dear colleague Alex McShane, but a lot of these fighters don't really make the money that you hear the likes of the Conor McGregors or I, to be honest, couldn't name you more fighters than, oh my God, Francis Ngannou, who was so massive. Like his bicep, when I saw him at the conference, was bigger than my head. And let me tell you, this nose is massive. To be bigger than my head and nose, that is an accomplishment. So good for you, Mr. Ngannou. P, what do you, like, I'm just going to lay this claim that I'm far more, not athletic, like I'm more of a sports fan than I think
100%.
You are. I know Chris and I like to duel a little bit because he is the fan of quite possibly the worst English Premier League team in the world, shit. Tottenham. Truly the worst.
Those are fighting words.
I mean,
look, take that
scoreboard, dude. Scoreboard, dude. Where did you guys finish on the table?
How many championships have you ever even won?
Oh, so now we're going to the past. When was the last time they won it?
Did you not just bring up the past?
This is today. This the standings just ended.
Fucking dying. Too much sports talk.
Whoa! That was last season, buddy. I'm talking about next season.
We're in
look to the future.
Anyway, first of all,
my question to Pete. My question to Pete is:
take it
do
all the
you
way
care?
back. All the way back. What sport are we talking about?
This is a great question.
Soccer.
Football, as they call it in the rest of the world.
Football, as Peter McCormick corrected me on the news desk when I kept talking to him about soccer.
When I was about 7 years old, I was fucking great at soccer. I mean, I could have been a contender. I was all about the mob ball, where all the players on the grass just like fucking converging the ball, and coach screams are like, "No, maintain your position, get in your position." And we would just, anyway, the point is, didn't work out, but horrible dogfighting accident. But that's why I don't care about sports.
So, I mean, look, when P was 7 years old, it was 1907. There were only 3 other people who played soccer in this country. So P actually was one of the first professional American soccer players and the youngest professional athlete ever at 7 years old, right?
That's correct.
Awesome. So as a retired former athlete and someone who doesn't follow the great world of just sports in general,
it's just too painful.
Do you care when this type of stuff happens?
No, actually, anytime anybody mentions sports around me, it triggers my PTSD. So yeah, I mean, like I said, it was a dogfighting accident where I just released a pack of dogs onto the field to take out my other players. And for some reason that was viewed as unsportsmanlike, but that wasn't what gave me PTSD. It was actually being removed from the league for that offense. Yeah, I just go to a faraway place.
You sound like a What's the guy, Mr. Burns in The Simpsons, who released the hounds?
Release the hounds. All right, but let's keep going.
Chris, sorry, we cut you off. What were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say, so you don't really care about the adoption of this, but I guess it gives it more mainstream media attention when like an athlete or a big name adopts it. I know it gets conflated with crypto a lot of times, but
yeah, no, all joking aside, I think despite the fact that I do not track on any sports ball teams, it is a big deal. You know, these are people that honestly, because of the way that professional sports often work, you know, you have a relatively short shelf life. You have a brief period of time to make a significant amount of money. And as is the case across all professions and all ages, financial understanding, financial knowledge is not prioritized in our society enough. And so I think it's it's extremely positive when people that are in a disproportionate situation to benefit because they only have this brief period of time where they're making, 90% of their income or whatever it is, 70% of their income for their whole life, to see more people in that position who are understanding Bitcoin and getting into Bitcoin, I think that's a phenomenal thing. And as you said, it motivates a lot of other people who wouldn't necessarily consider Bitcoin because these are very public figures. They're incredibly respected and they have a very different audience. And so, at Bitcoin Magazine, our mission is to, bring Bitcoin to as many people as possible per unit time. And so I think it's fantastic in that regard. The only thing that I think would bring more people to Bitcoin is, if a presidential figure maybe drowned in, a 50-gallon or actually like let's say 100,000 gallon pool full of maple syrup while screaming Bitcoin. That would probably do it too.
So, they're going to say open dimes, but I'll give you the maple syrup.
Other than wishing pain and death upon our enemies, Chris,
that's not what I said. Maple syrup is a painless way to go. Just goes into your lungs, clogs them up, and kills you.
I want to quickly shout out and plug the Leclerc family syrup farm. Quite possibly the best maple syrup you'll ever get. I highly recommend just check them out. And yes, I am talking about Dylan Leclerc's family. So I'm not kidding. I was not paid to do this. Their maple syrup is delicious. The entire state of Vermont, every IHOP you go to, if you ask for like real maple syrup, you get the Leclerc family maple syrup. So that's how legit they are.
He's a maple syrup baron.
Chris, what is an athlete or what is a sport that you want to see orange pilled?
I want to see soccer like truly orange pilled. Right now they're doing like the whole crypto crap. Like I think United's partnered. One of our guys at Bitcoin Magazine, he's a huge United fan, and he's like, this club can't get any worse. And then they partnered with a crypto company, and even just a lot of South American countries are doing it too. It's a shame because the South American countries like Argentina or Chile or other countries that are experiencing hyperinflation, they're doing it to try and escape their own currency. It's a shame that when they go to something that they're basically being rug pulled by another scammer. Instead of their central bank of their country scamming them, it's some crypto scammer that's like, hey, come here for the riches. We're going to help you out. Do you want more or do you want less, Pete? Do you want more or do you want less?
Oh, sweet Jesus. I agree. It is a shame. And I think also I worry that when people have that experience because of the affinity scamming, right? You've got Bitcoin, which is this pristine asset that is truly innovative. And then you have everything else. We'll say 99.9% of every other, quote unquote crypto project is just bullshit. That's affinity scamming. That is to say, the sort of, I love Bitcoin, buy my shitcoin. And, there are hundreds of millions of marketing dollars being spent promoting those things. And so when people get burned on those, I always worry that they will be turned off to Bitcoin as well as, these horrible bullshit scams.
You're not wrong. I mean, unfortunately, because of the lack of education around what Bitcoin is compared to broader crypto, unfortunately, Bitcoin is just a byproduct of anything bad that happens. It's assumed that Bitcoin as well. Look, I've gotten so many texts. My girlfriend has gotten so many texts from friends and family members asking, are we concerned? Are we scared? And to be honest, I have this like almost evil grin, as she likes to call it, where I'm like, no, I'm excited. Let's buy more. So it is what it is. I think these fears come from a lack of education. So when you get spit that FUD in your direction, or when your friends kind of mock you or say like, what is this shit? Like, I don't care. Like, that's on them. That's their personal journey. No judgment to them. No qualms with what they decide to do. To each their own is my MO. But I will answer my own question that I asked Chris now, and I will also agree with you in the notion of soccer. I do actually think Peter McCormick's strategy of having his reserves held in Bitcoin based on what he aspires to accomplish and the growth he wants his small market team to have should eventually lead to both hyper Bitcoinization being utilized and then Bitcoin being introduced into this mini circular economy, if you will. Remains to be seen. It only really works, I think, if both Bedford FC starts winning regularly and gets promoted, and then at the same time, Bitcoin does enter a period of hyper Bitcoinization within the proper window of time. But like, to be honest with you, I would love to see Arsenal just have some of their treasury set off in Bitcoin. So there would be no need to join this like bullshit super league and milk the masses for whatever they're trying to milk us for. But yeah, I think we've exhausted all conversations around sports. Go Lakers, Mamba forever. Our next story now is let's go to the Fedi. Fedi raises $4 million to scale Bitcoin custody with Fedimint. We will also be having a Twitter Spaces later this afternoon at 5 p.m. Eastern time. To discuss this with all the creators. P, I believe you are a lot more well-versed in this. If you want to maybe share with everyone what to expect here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to spoil it too much, but essentially, Obinuasu, who is one of the main people that's part of the I forget the exact name, but the Bitcoin Foundation Trust that Jack Dorsey and who's the other person that was part of this?
Sorry, what was it? It was
who did the B Trust? No, the B Trust. Jack Dorsey and
I'm drawing a blank.
Was it Saylor?
No. It's an incredibly famous rapper.
Oh, Jay-Z.
Yes, there we go. Jay-Z and Jack Dorsey created the B Trust. It's this fund that has a bunch of Bitcoin in it to support the development of Bitcoin technologies and people that are involved in Bitcoin. Obinuasu is one of the not the chairs, but like one of the people that oversees that setup. So he and Eric Syrian, who's done a lot of work on federated Chaumian mints, and then also who is the third person? I'm blanking on their name. Justin Moon. Thank you. All three of them have created a new company called Fedi, which of course is the first part of Fedimint. And we're going to be talking about that later. But essentially, it's a way to, among many other things, distribute trust. It's sort of a really novel way of having a community of people who were trusted leaders in that community, basically are part of a federation that has control over, with the people involved, of the Bitcoin that is stored within that system. And so it's a really interesting way of allowing people to use Bitcoin without having to take on the burden of keeping track of one's private keys and all these other things, which are very possible for many of us, but in a lot of other communities, it's too much to take on, and then there's a risk of loss of seed phrase and stuff like that. So it has a lot of really cool aspects. It also allows you to scale Bitcoin to more people. So we'll be going into that, but it is a really, really exciting development. And they're producing a wallet as well that will make it really easy for community leaders to help set up these sort of community run systems to be able to store and ultimately transact in Bitcoin.
P, I don't want to get too much into it, but basically, isn't what like Bitcoin Beach or in El Zante, El Salvador, isn't that kind of what they did? They didn't do a federated mint, but the way that they were circulating Bitcoin around was very circular, and it was centralized, but it was a trust model. But it was like, correct me if I'm wrong.
It definitely has some similarities. Yeah, I mean, you're on the right track. It definitely has some similarities. There are some really sort of novel things that a federated Chaumian mint does that Bitcoin Beach is not doing. Specifically, the using cryptography in blind signatures to be able to sort of transact in these cryptographically secure IOUs rather than directly in Bitcoin as needed. So again, we'll go into a lot more of the details during the spaces, and I honestly want to let them explain it because they will do an infinitely better job than I'm doing here. But it's I'm super excited, and the fact that there is a company, they just raised a bunch of money. Like I said, they're developing a wallet, they're developing all these protocols, so it really is going to jumpstart this extremely important aspect of scaling Bitcoin to as many people as possible. It's something that a lot of people are super excited about, and I think it's kind of the next step in terms of getting Bitcoin into the hands of more people.
All great stuff, all pointing towards hyper Bitcoinization. I guess we'll talk about this one, although candidly, like we spent a lot of time trying to figure out at what valuation Zebedee did raise, but they raised an additional $35 million in, I believe, a Series B round. This is exciting. We've done a lot of work with Zebedee. They're the gaming platform that's built on top of the Lightning Network that allows for micropayments, just further validating use cases for Bitcoin and micropayments. So this is an exciting step in the right direction and proves despite the bear market, there are still investors willing to hear out good ideas and good businesses can continue to build out what they're working on. So shout out to our friends over at Zebedee. Excited to see what they're going to be cooking up, especially during this bear market.
I want to speak to that a little bit more. One of the things that's that there's a pattern where people are like, oh, I want to sort of, shoehorn Bitcoin or shoehorn whatever technology into an existing product. And the more effective way to develop things is to explore the things that Bitcoin and the Lightning Network are specifically superior in doing. And one of the things, like the basis for Zebedee at its core, is to be able to stream micropayments, as you said. And there's other systems that allow one to do that. Strike can support streaming payments and things like that. But Zebedee basically took this specific use case, which is if you are a gamer and you're doing Twitch streams and things like that, how can you incentivize people using the Lightning Network? And there isn't an existing system that allows you to do it as effectively, right? You can basically have a system where you're trusting some third party to basically like make you whole at the end, but the Lightning Network is super effective at having a much less trusted system. Now, of course, there's trade-offs there, and if you're using Zebedee Wallet, you have your funds in their wallet until you transfer it out, but you can as soon as you want to. And it is such a cool experience. Like I first heard about Zebedee because I was playing, messing around with JC Crown, and basically it was like we would have these Counter-Strike rooms where literally you're playing Counter-Strike, and every time you kill someone, you basically earn sats, and it goes directly into your wallet, and then you can transfer it out. And so it creates these structures where there are people in many other countries who are making like material money by just playing Counter-Strike and playing other video games and earning sats in real time, which they can then go to support their families and buy food and all this cool stuff. There's a lot of other innovations that Zebedee has, but it's a really interesting use case, and I'm excited for this new aspect of which has been happening consistently throughout time, but the time that Bitcoin has existed. But it is exciting to see more and more companies who are finding these specific niches or these specific use cases for Bitcoin that nothing else can successfully, solve. And then they're just using Bitcoin or the Lightning Network in that place.
Yeah, Pia, and I want to add on that, like exactly what we were saying before. The South American countries are experiencing hyperinflation. I've heard stories from the Zebedee guys that they have a big Brazil community, like you mentioned. And to your point, these kids must be phenomenal because they're playing games, they're winning sats. And they said one of the kids, he had been playing for a few months, he was bringing home more money than what his dad was at, a full 2 weeks worth of work. And obviously he's very good. He's winning a lot. That's why he's getting all these sats. But, imagine like playing video games. I know that's kind of very big in the Twitch community, making money from that and then being able to use those to buy real world goods for your families. So I think it's huge. I think it's really cool. And to your point, even it gets rid of third-party risk. There is a risk when you're putting your sats up on the platform, but after the round ends, you can scan a QR code, you can pull it right back into your own custody. And, obviously that's normally a hot wallet. Then you can transfer to cold storage as well. So it's very, very cool. And I think there's a lot of innovations there.
Yeah. There's also a lot of cool stuff in terms of like there's like gamer tags. So like if we all, and this is, native to their wallet, again, it's a Bitcoin wallet that is optimized for their specific use case. But like, I can go like at Chris and like just be sending you sats for whatever we want. And again, we're going to see more and more of these types of tools that plug the Lightning Network and plug Bitcoin in to existing things that work great and make them even better.
Do we want to go to commercial now before we dive into the bigger story? Or should we just dive into the bigger story and then let Chris come on?
Let's dive into the bigger story, and then we'll go to ads, and then we'll get Chris in here.
Okay. So honestly, this just brings me so much joy. Celsius lawyers claim users gave up their legal right to their BTC by using their platform. That's not the part that I'm actually brings me joy. It's the second line. They're going to look for sales. Damn it, I went Ron Burgundy on this. All right. Essentially, too long didn't read / grammar is really bad on that. Celsius lawyers, in part of their filing, are claiming that Twitter FUD was a main driver as to why their token went to shit. My question to you, viewer at home, is it really FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, if it's true?
Yeah, absolutely not. I mean, this is, this is a direct reference to, Corey over at Swan Bitcoin. He did a fantastic job of being like, yo, you got to get your money off of that exchange. And in fact, notorious scammer and lizard person Alex Machinsky actually made a video that was like, look, your funds are safe. This is all bullshit. Don't even worry about it. Like literally reinforcing the Ponzi, right? Because they were desperate to get more funds because they basically did extremely irresponsible things with their clients' funds. They, were leveraging them and loaning them out in DeFi schemes and all this crazy bullshit. They then, because they were taking far too much risk, they got basically rugged by this like nefarious scammer that they were like loaning everybody's money out to. And now they're like, it wasn't our fault. Like, how could we possibly have known? Which is total horseshit. They were warned multiple times by there's a risk management group that they were using that was actually eventually like, we can't have anything to do with you because this is extremely unsafe and you are risking your client's funds. And Celsius was like, we know exactly what we're doing. Get the fuck out of here. And so it's just like lie after lie after lie after lie. And it's hilarious to see them now trying to claim that the reason for their blow up was Twitter FUD or that it had a large part of it. Like they're trying to imply that there's like a bank run because some specific niche community was like telling the truth about them.
I would just love if they were just like, oh yeah, Alex Mashinsky put this $2 billion liability on our books. Like did Corey put that there? Unless Corey was the one that took out a loan from them for $2 billion and then sank the company so he never has to pay it back. That's not, that's completely a joke. That's not what Corey did. But that's the point. Like Corey was calling out for their scammy practices. $2 billion is not million with a B, $2 billion. It's absurd.
There's like an artist rendition. I'm imagining in the courtroom. There's like, like the easel they hold up and it's like Corey Clipstein with like a gun, like holding it to Machinsky's back. Like, you better lose that money. Fucking do it. And then he's like simultaneously tweeting in the background.
I just think there's also a degree of this where, and shout out to Dylan LeClaire and Sam Rule and the Bitcoin Magazine Pro guys. They have done an extensive amount of research on this issue. Some of the things that are not surprising at this point being with some hindsight, a Celsius employee came out and was essentially laying out the playbook that Celsius was taking the newest investors' funds and paying back the oldest investors. Literally the way a Ponzi scheme works. Like, it is deplorable to say the least. And I feel like I'm watching a 5-year-old have a temper tantrum. Like, I didn't fuck it up. I didn't do that. I didn't make the mistake. Like, they fucked it up for us. It's like, own it. You fucked up. You made a mistake. And I think the real nail in the coffin for me personally was the fact that Mashinsky tried to leave America and go to Israel. And the fact that he's an Israeli citizen implies
that is amazing.
He's not going to get extradited. So he was running away, and you don't run away because you did nothing wrong. You ran away and go into hiding because you did something wrong. Kind of like the guys over at 3 Arrows Capital that apparently can't be found still, I think. Like, this is, and I finally have had the chance to start reading the book version of The Big Short. And like, I stayed up way too late last night. When I looked at my clock at what time I was falling asleep, I was like, yes, I'm not watching TV before going to bed. Holy shit, I stayed up until 11:30 reading a book. God damn it.
That is not that late. I thought you were going to be like, I stayed till 3 a.m. The birds were chirping.
I wake up at 6. So, and I've been aiming to get back into the 5 a.m. club. It's just, it's so dark at 5. It really fucks with me sometimes, but I will get there. I will return. I digress though. It is fascinating to me rereading that and really understanding like how interconnected everything was. And when Dylan LeClaire sent his tweet out saying like Bitcoin and crypto is having its Lehman Brothers moment, this is what he meant. It's the fact that Celsius can go bankrupt and then all of a sudden Three Arrows Capital somehow has ties to it. But hey, don't forget, Three Arrows Capital has the majority or the most amount of shares of GBTC. And they've already been ordered to start liquidating those shares. So how fast they're going to be able to do it remains to be seen. But we are far from over. And there's going to be a lot more collateral still to come. If there is any takeaway that is not financial advice, just for you to do some more homework, it is get your Bitcoin off of these exchanges. There are reports coming out that Coinbase may start to flutter. You have Gemini doing a second round of layoffs. The worst is not in yet. And this is just one man's opinion. And I am not trying to provide you financial advice. I'm not telling you to buy or sell anything. I'm simply urging you to self-custody, because once you hold your Bitcoin, you hold it. No one else can take it from you unless you mess it up, or as Chris and I found out over the weekend in that boating accident where we lost all our Bitcoin, like probably not a good idea to wear it as a necklace, but like one of those long necklaces that doesn't need to be unclipped. Because then when you get
like a
flipped on
mankini that goes all the way down to the crotch. You can store it in there.
I mean, now you're giving everyone a visual of what I was wearing over the weekend, but
sorry, bro.
Just watch Borat. Like that's what I look like when I wear my mankini.
Yep. I just want to say one other thing on that note. When you hear about all these like blowups, that is not Bitcoin. That is crypto bullshit, right? All these companies were involved in the cryptocurrency space. Bitcoin is a sound asset. One of the things that is so important about Bitcoin is radical personal financial responsibility. And if you have been listening to Bitcoin Maxis or any of the articles that we publish on Bitcoin Magazine, we've been talking about the importance of holding your own keys for years, right? This is not the first time an exchange where multiple exchanges have blown up. Before, back in the day, it was Mt. Gox. This will not be the last time. That is why Bitcoin is so revolutionary, because it allows you to take custody of your own financial future. Do the research, take your money off of an exchange when you are ready to, and you are comfortable doing so, and you've tested it all out. But for the love of God, learn how to do it safely and then do it. That's all I got. Let's pull Chris in.
Quickly before we do that, and honestly, Chris can speak a little bit more to this, but tickets for Bitcoin Amsterdam are going to go up in price on Friday. We are in the final stages of confirming there's going to be something weed related. So if you wanted to smoke weed with me, like there will actually very likely be an opportunity to do that. So please buy your tickets before ticket prices go up on Friday. Promo code BM Live does not work yet. I promise you how much the ticket prices will go up will make it more expensive even with the discount code that we'll provide. So lock in your tickets now before it's too late. You're not going to want to miss the biggest Bitcoin conference in Europe. Plus, dude, we're going to have Sound Money Fest in Amsterdam. Like, say less. Let's go to a commercial and bring Chris Smith on. Oh, I pulled a P. I fucking love that song. It just gets me to dance at 10:30 in the morning. You can't ask for much more than that. I'm excited to introduce our next guest for today. He was formerly an intern for all of us, turned full-time employee over at BTC Inc. Uh, Chris, how else would you describe yourself?
Man, how else would I describe myself? I love Bitcoin. I'm a Bitcoiner here in the Nashville HQ today. So ready to get into it, talk Amsterdam, everything Bitcoin in Europe.
So before we dive into that, I do want to just go through and hear a little bit more about your specific Bitcoin story because you recently graduated from college, correct?
I did, yes.
And I'm so curious what your experience was like going through a four-year university in the current age of Bitcoin. Like, were people talking about it a lot? Was it considered super niche? What was your major? Did it come up in your classes? What was your experience of it?
Yeah, so I knew about Bitcoin back in like 2015, 2016 through kind of the CSGO online gambling phase. So there were these like CSGO lottery gambling sites that were super popular. And that's when I first got introduced. I was never like actively investing or really didn't really know what it was, but I had knowledge of it. And then when I went into college, there was kind of a small group of people that I met that were super into Bitcoin and, dare I say, the C word, crypto. But we kind of got into it. We kind of had our own little group. No one really understood it at all, but they knew it was super popular and they talked about it a lot. And a lot of people were putting like their stimulus checks in it and stuff. So it was a very degenerate environment for sure. But really everyone knew what it was, but no one knew what it was at all. So they knew the name Bitcoin, they knew that it was going up in price, and they knew that it was going to the moon. But they couldn't tell you how to self custody an asset or even what self custody was.
That's so
So
interesting. Go for it,
I
Q.
want to I want to ask because you actually wrote an article sharing how your fraternity actually adopted Bitcoin. Uh, Walk us through that a little bit. Like what it sounds to me like it wasn't a very difficult conversation to have because people were not only aware of it, but they were also they had some skin in the game. There was some sort of inkling to explore this deeper. How did that idea come and what was sort of the result?
Yeah, so the president at the time, Sean Hagan, he's actually an intern for BPI now under David and Grant. But he's awesome. He's the one who originally got me into Bitcoin back in 2019, 2020. During the COVID dip, he sold his car for like a whole coin or two. So he's awesome. He's the one who kind of got me off the shitcoin wave when I first got into the market. He was that steady voice the whole time that was always like, no, like Bitcoin's what we need to be focusing on. You're getting distracted, like you're going to get burnt. And of course I did. And I learned the lesson the hard way. But definitely orange pill now. But me and him, he was the president and I was another exec. And basically the fraternity was led by 5 executives. And 4 of us were very into Bitcoin at the time. And it made sense. We had done a lot of research. We were all finance majors on MicroStrategy, and we kind of wanted to implement something similar in a smaller structure within our fraternal organization. We actually were solving an issue. It wasn't like we were just doing this. It was really hard to track like transactions and dues through Venmo or Cash App or any type of fiat payment system that we had access to. For our treasurer to actually track everything, it was a lot easier to use on-chain transactions than it was to do Venmo. And it was also cheaper. So um, yeah, that's how it all started. We went the sailor suit, as we say, and everyone in the fraternity was on board. Everyone loved the idea of just being different. We were already kind of an out there fraternity, I guess. We didn't really bend to the common norm. We had a lot of business majors, a lot of people who were super involved in finance, and a lot of people who just wanted to learn more. Sean and I were very orange pilled at the time, a lot more so than a lot of the other members of the club. So we were the ones who kind of like first were like introducing the idea. Alongside this idea, we were introducing the idea of using Strike instead of Venmo. So kind of like the thesis of this was, oh, you're watching a sports game with your college friends, like we get a pizza, right? Why are we gonna Venmo each other when we could just strike each other and actually stack sats? So that was where like the original thesis came around. And eventually we wanted to hold it on our balance sheet because we did some research and realized no like actual fraternal organizations in the whole world had claimed to have hold Bitcoin on their balance sheet. So of course we wanted to be the first. We wanted to be the Trojan horse that kind of led this movement and showed organizations within like the school system that they could actually hold Bitcoin on their balance sheet. They could accept dues on chain, and they could do it successfully.
How much of a heart attack did your treasury or whoever, I don't know how you guys called it, how much of a heart attack did that guy have?
Well, at first he was definitely cooler with it, but then we didn't want to just stop at point A. We wanted to go all the way. So we ended up self-custodying our own Bitcoin on our balance sheet, and that's where he definitely started having a heart attack, having to have like funds. And another thing that this was good for was alumni donations. So a lot of alumni wanted to like reach out and donate to us, of course, to help fund the organization. And they were very interested in doing this in Bitcoin. And we actually received 70% of all donations last year from alumni in Bitcoin. So that was super cool. And I really don't think any other organization could say that. And I also wanted to touch on this, which I think is super important. So when you hold as an organization within like the academia bill, when you hold your own assets, you can't actually have any custody over them at all. You have to hold them under the school's like reign. So whenever alumni donates to our organization, the school earns a commission on that donation that they pocket themselves. So they earn, I think it was like 10 to 15% of the donation automatically goes to the school. And then the rest is held in a bank account that is controlled by the school. Me and Sean, we were too orange pilled to have that fly. So that was like the real initial spark of all of this. Cause we were like, first off, we want to be able to spend our money when we want to without submitting this long, extensive form to the school on why we need to spend our own money. And second, we don't want to have to give the school 15% of all our donations. So last year when the alumni were donating in Bitcoin, that cut out both of those problems completely.
Was there any pushback from the university or separate? Did you have to like vet this with your alumni board?
There wasn't a lot of pushback. We don't have a huge alumni. We're kind of a newer fraternity. But the ones I was pretty closely good friends and good relationships with the ones they had. So the alumni were great. Originally, the school definitely had pushback because originally we just wanted to create our own bank account, and they wouldn't allow that. But once we had Bitcoin, the school really like didn't have that much pushback because they didn't know how to custody it themselves, nor did they think they were legally allowed to as like an educational system. So they were very much like, okay, y'all just do whatever you have to do. This is cool. It seems like it's getting the school publicity. We're just gonna not talk about it.
Interesting. So it doesn't sound like you didn't have any like rabid detractors, people who were like, Bitcoin will boil the oceans, that kind of thing.
No, not really. I think it was more like people just didn't want to get involved. They just didn't want to put anything else on their plate. Oh, and also to clarify, I'm in Sigma Alpha. It's a smaller fraternity, and it's not affiliated with Sigma or SAE, Sigma Alpha Epsilon. It's kind of a subsect of that. A little bit hard to explain, but we don't have to get into that. We can focus on Bitcoin.
You guys are the detractors. It's fine. I get it. I was in SIGAP. We detracted as well, but we detracted like over 100 years ago.
That's like the Slither.
Exactly.
Was it like a Slytherin of fraternities?
Slytherin. That's a good way to put it.
I wouldn't say that, but I mean, look,
Yeah, of course you wouldn't, because I mean you're part of that fraternity.
no, I was not. I was an SA. I was a SIG different
I don't know what any
fraternities.
of these words mean.
It's just bullshit Greek letters that I paid a lot of money to be able to say that I was a part of. I don't know.
I got asked to be in a fraternity, and I was like, I am a lone wolf. I do what I want. And then I did 3 black flips, because I'm a black man, and then just faded into darkness.
They literally opened the door and they're like, "Yeah, you can go now."
That's exactly what happened. They were like, get the fuck out of our fraternity.
I genuinely went to college with 2 intentions: to play soccer and to join a fraternity and party my ass off.
Jesus.
So,
We could not have gone to college for more different reasons.
I mean, I ended up spending the entire time interning and working, which, Chris, that is, I feel like part of what your college journey was like, given the fact that you were interning for us while you were still in school. Talk to us about just how much are beyond just your fraternity, because we're old men. I'm older than you. P is older than me. Like, that's how elder statesman you're talking to. Bitcoin itself it was around when I was in college. I think that the US dollar just came off the gold standard when P was in college, to give you really sense of timelines here. So what I want to get a sense from you is, what, beyond just your fraternity and your circle, were there conversations about Bitcoin or even the bad word crypto amongst your peers and other classmates, or even in your business school courses? Like, I took a finance class, and like, we had professors talking to us about Bitcoin, but probably not. It definitely wasn't didn't resonate. I do want to shout out my stats professor from sophomore year, whose name is escaping me right now. Best professor I think I've ever had. And he was like a big Bitcoiner back in 2013.
It was a great shout out, by the way.
I'm going to
Guy,
find
his name I can't remember, who, may or may not have changed your life.
I think his name is Kurok Ray. Yep, I was right. Professor Ray, you're the man. Thank you. You teach at Texas A&M now. But yeah, Chris, my question to you, like, what was the conversation amongst faculty? Did you ever have any projects? Like what do the kids talk about when they talk about Bitcoin and crypto in school now?
Yeah, so it was definitely a journey. So when I first got into it, my sophomore year was really when I got into it. But freshman year, I was the type of kid who like really tried to like, I wouldn't say like make the teachers mad, but I really tried to like challenge their, I guess, traditional beliefs a lot. So I'd ask questions, and a lot to do with like crypto and Bitcoin and dare I say crypto, exactly. But really, like, I'd say freshman year, like, some of the professors knew about it, but none of the students knew about it. And the professors kind of just referred to it as like a Ponzi scheme, like the typical like tradfi, like just deflect the question, don't even like talk about it. And then each year that went on, more and more people talked about it, to the point where my senior year, when we were doing Bloomberg market concepts and we were studying financial charts and doing technical analysis and things like that, a lot of the times we were actually using the Bitcoin chart, and they were like slowly kind of integrating it into their system. And it was very good. And I had a teacher, he was the head of the finance department at my university. His name was Julio Rivas. He has a PhD in economics, and he's quite frequently on our local news talking about crypto and Bitcoin adoption. And he is definitely an orange pill giga chad, if you will. And he's awesome. And he was the sponsor of our fraternity. And he kind of led with me, I guess, that strike forward. When I first published that article, he was the one who was going to bat with, we have our own publishing, I guess, our own publishing media within Lipscomb, my college, called Lumination. And they published like a whole extensive article about how we adopted a Bitcoin standard for our fraternity. And Julio Rivas was the one who really pushed that forward. And none of this would have happened without him. But I'm sure within the last week, he was on either CNN or some type of platform talking about Bitcoin. So there's definitely good actors within academia who are trying to push Bitcoin forward. They're just weary, I guess, about it, doing it while also receiving flack for it, which is kind of a double standard in my opinion. I feel like if you're going to push it forward, you really just need to go all in. But some people aren't willing to do that. And that's just kind of the reality of the situation. As far as the students, that was just a total, like, as the Bitcoin price was going up, that was the amount of people that were talking about it. Like, it was directly coincided, directly correlated. Right when we hit that first 64K top, that week was when people were talking about it the most. So just look at that chart if you want to know how many college students were into Bitcoin. Directly coincides.
When you went to parties, were people like, oh shit, that's the guy who works for Bitcoin Magazine. He's the coolest person ever. And then you'd like, like open a beer bottle with your teeth and then just like throw it at someone and they'd be like, oh my gosh, how does he do it?
I'd say it was actually the complete opposite. Often they would write like crypto or Bitcoin is for virgins. Just stuff like that.
By the way, that's exactly what I experienced as a adult man in the working profession. Same thing. Bitcoin is for virgins. People would scream it at me. I was teaching at the time, and my students would just make paper airplanes and then throw them into my eye. I'd open it up, and it would just be a picture of a butt.
I've got a fun one for you guys. I had an ex-girlfriend when I told her I was starting to put a lot of money into Bitcoin, literally roll her eyes, tell me it was stupid. Like everyone she knows had lost money on it and that I was going to lose all my money on it. I started buying at 12K and like genuinely rode this wave down, and she was fucking adamant. She's like, dude, stop buying more. We broke up, and within 2 days, not only did it cross above 12, but that was the beginning of the bull run. And I genuinely sat there laughing. I was like, so you were the thing holding back Bitcoin's price.
You should have just done the classic, like, do you like to have fun? And then when they say, I guess, yeah. And you say, well, have fun staying poor, you son of a bitch. And that always works. Really, it's an
My bad, I
effective way to
totally killed your punchline. No, fuck that. No.
All right, I want to hear about Amsterdam.
Yes, let's do it.
Tell us what is happening with the Amsterdam conference and why we should be excited.
Well, first off, let's talk. I feel like to talk about Amsterdam, we have to talk about Netherlands, of course, because Amsterdam is in Netherlands. And now more than ever, I was talking to Boris the other day, and he's an Amsterdam Bitcoiner, and he made a really good point that a lot of our conferences in the past have been like more trending on the celebration side, right? Like we are celebrating our accomplishments, like everything that's gone on in Bitcoin. Like this is a time for celebration. But Boris said, I don't know if people are going to view this one as that. Because there's a lot of tension going on in the Netherlands with the farmers and everything going on with the WEF and just overall tyranny in Europe. And this really isn't a celebration. This is a call to action. This is hey, let's put a spotlight on this real quick, because we shouldn't ignore this, because the longer we ignore this, the larger this problem is going to get, and the bigger and the more people affected from this problem. And I thought that was just a really good point, especially someone who has boots on the ground in the area, because yes, we do need time for celebration, and celebrating Bitcoin is awesome, but there is an end goal here, and that is the fight for freedom all over the world, establish a Bitcoin standard, and ultimately revolve the world around a hard money. And that's the complete opposite of what's going on in the Netherlands right now. If not the literal polar opposite, freedoms are getting taken away. Individuals, Boris was telling me that he went to the grocery store the other morning and he couldn't buy milk. He couldn't buy eggs. And me in America in Nashville, I haven't struggled with that at all, but these people are really struggling with these freedoms. So I don't think we should go into Amsterdam saying, okay, let's bring this celebration to Amsterdam. I think we should go into it saying, this is what hyper-Bitcoinization is. This is how we expand globally. Europe is just our first stop. Before we celebrate, there's a job to be done, and there's a message to be spread and said and spoken very, very loudly. And I think that's the goal. And I think that's what we're going to try and do. And I think that's why the European Bitcoiners should get behind this event.
So, how is this going to be different than Bitcoin 22? Other than the fact that it's in Amsterdam and I may never come back to America.
Well, that's a good point. I might stay with you, Q. But it's going to be different in that it's going to be smaller. And it's going to be a lot more centered around Bitcoin, 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 and more Bitcoin. And not saying Bitcoin 2022 wasn't that, which it was, absolutely. But there's a different approach you get to it when you are accomplishing a different goal. With Bitcoin 2022, there was things to celebrate. We just went on the most massive bull run we've ever had in Bitcoin's history. We had a country declared as legal tender. We had companies adopted on their balance sheets. There was a lot to celebrate. But the celebration can't just be all that there is, because if the only thing you do is celebrate, then you're never going to get anything done. And I think Bitcoin Amsterdam is kind of a back to reality moment where we are now expanding to different parts of the world that do not have the freedom that the United States has. And it's great to go down to Miami and have a great time and party. And don't get me wrong, we're going to party in Amsterdam for sure. But there is a goal, and at least for the attendees that are attending, it means a little bit more to them. It hits a little bit closer to home. When we have freedom forums, when we have speakers up there who are talking directly to these people who understand what they're feeling and understand the struggles that they're going through, it's on a personal level. And I believe that once we get to the personal level, the celebration is great, but it's time to go talk to our European neighbors, get them on board for this, and start expanding hyper Bitcoinization, first in Europe and then everywhere else.
I should probably just start leaving myself unmuted. Where or like what? Let's walk through the schedule a little bit, because it's same but different, right? Like Sound Money Fest. That's not a whole day thing anymore. That's just like a nighttime party, or is it a whole day thing?
Yeah, no, that's going to be a nighttime party. So we're not going to have an industry day for Amsterdam. We're going to fit somewhere between 5,000 to 7,000 people in the venue. So it's going to be a little bit smaller. And the rate we're going right now with, just to be transparent with our goals, by the time we get on site, this event most likely is going to be sold out. So if you are a European Bitcoiner and you are listening to this, I do strongly encourage you go ahead and get your tickets. First off, the price is cheap. And there are many ways to get into Amsterdam if you might be struggling with that due to like medical reasons. So just stay tuned, get your ticket, get on board. We're going to have a good time over there. So get it now, because I don't think that we're gonna have any tickets for sale at the door.
Cool. Awesome. So locking the tickets, ticket prices go up on Friday, correct?
Yes, they go up on Friday.
Cool.
2 days, 11 hours from now.
So thank you for all of that. We may ask you to maybe plug at the very end who your favorite or what speaker you're looking forward to. But until we get there, I want to go back to what you youngins are talking about in Bitcoin. And I think more specifically, what I'm kind of curious about, like I had a conversation with an older gentleman yesterday, and we were kind of talking about the Bitcoin price of it all. And he asked me, he's like, how do you feel about the fact that Bitcoin is down so much? I'm like, to be honest, I love it. Like I have the opportunity to really grab as much as I can at this lower price, decrease my cost basis based on how much I was buying above this level. And you know what? Like if it chills here for 2 years, I'm kind of fine with it. I can live with that. He on the other side was like, fair. I mean, I'm in my 70s and I don't really have 2 years to wait for the next potential bull run. So there's like this time horizon for some people, unfortunately. You have a whole decade less than a decade on me, on the downside. Like you have an even longer, shorter time horizon. I always forget. I always mix those two up. Point I'm trying to make while I'm rambling is like, what is it that you want to spend your Bitcoin on if you ever spend it? Or what is like the general consensus amongst your friends on how Bitcoin will be transacted? And I'm more curious, and maybe you don't have any more normie friends left after you've left college, but I'm more curious about your normie friends who are not in the space than, the likes of Duke and the rest of the BTC Inc. family.
So I think like for me, most of my friends are actually in Bitcoin at this point, just from being in the space for, pretty active for a couple of years now, interning at Bitcoin Magazine, being at the conference, being super active, and now having a full-time role, being super involved in the Nashville meetups with the Nash Bitcoiners and stuff. So that really is kind of where the majority of my friends are now. I still definitely have normie friends per se, but a lot of them are in finance. So I have a bunch of friends who work for like really traditional finance companies like UBS, Goldman Sachs, stuff like that. And I somehow got a pretty smart group of friends, even though they're all degenerates. But yeah, they really kind of miss it. I guess the ones that aren't orange pilled, they're too stuck on the term blockchain. And they're like blockchain technology, blockchain technology, blockchain technology. Like we like Bitcoin, but like we're really interested in blockchain. And I don't really think that they understand like what blockchain really like means. That like kind of like the thesis that they're backing, like the goal that they're backing is really made of empty promises and doesn't have much structure behind it, or and really doesn't make total sense to begin with when you actually break it down. And a lot of them really aren't like super shitcoiny, to be honest with you. They are more looking at like traditional finance adopting Bitcoin. So like they are in favor of like regulation, like very proactively in
No.
favor of regulation. Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Compliance bros.
But like, what,
compliance, bro.
like,
Well,
what is
also,
their logic? What is the logic that they think they're using to justify this? Slash, can you call one of them on speakerphone right now so we can shame them?
also, just for the audience, before you answer that, I just want to say, set the context. People love to say like, "Oh, put a blockchain on it," and it's a way. It's just like with the .com boom. If you put like whatever the fucking name of your company was, and then .com, you immediately got like $10 million in funding, like just instantly. And there was a period, basically in every bull run, everybody becomes, to Chris's earlier point, when everybody, when we were at 64K, 69K, everyone he knew was like, "Yo, how do I get me some of this Bitcoins?" With an S. There is no S. Bitcoin is plural. Bitcoin is singular. Anyway. But it's all bullshit. There are many things that almost every other use case, a database, whether it's SQL or Postgres or whatever, is going to do the job much more effectively than a fucking blockchain. Blockchains are very good at a very narrow set of things, and they make massive trade-offs in terms of, ease of use and, accessibility and speed of access, to basically maintain, at least with Bitcoin, decentralization, censorship resistance, immutability, all these other things that for an application, for 99.9% of applications, a fucking database will do the job. So people just love to throw blockchain out there because it's a buzzword and because VCs love to hear it. One of the most famous ones was DentaCoin. It was like, we're going to put dentists on the blockchain. It still exists. It has no actual valid use case. Please continue, Chris.
Yeah, and that's really exactly what it is. It's okay, what system is slow? What system does not work? What traditional finance system like could we improve? Oh, so now we're gonna say let's put it on a blockchain. And like they are all on board that wave, without really using much critical thinking at all. They're not coders. It's not like they are IT or computer science majors, CS majors, and like they actually have like very depth knowledge in C++, SQL, and other languages. It's not like they have any development experience at all. They're finance majors, they're accounting majors that really want to go with this trend because they believe that adopting this trend is, and this is just my opinion, but I think that they believe that like adopting this set of beliefs and adopting this trend that's currently going on will allow them to have the least amount of resistance to adopt a new technology while also single-handedly, selfishly benefiting from that monetarily. Meaning that if they are okay with blockchain, okay with Bitcoin, okay with regulation, if they like support new technology, but they want to put a cap on it, it's kind of like their comfort area, you know? They're comfortable there. It's not out of their comfort zone. They can quickly and easily change their opinion if needed. They can flow like the water and not have any firm foundation at all. And that's what they think, and they don't want to be uncomfortable with this new technology because I believe they don't understand it, and that's why they don't want to be uncomfortable with it, because they don't want to speak about something that they don't know about. They think this is easy. They want to be involved, but they don't want to put their neck on the line at the same time. So it's like they try to find that middle ground. They try to appease, right, others while also benefiting from it, and really they're trying to play both sides of the coin. And I don't think that's how that works. I don't think that's the right way to look about it. I look at it very differently than that, but I think that's the reality of where most people my age are at. They are on board for the technology revolution, but don't want to put much work for it to actually happen.
It sounds like they still have quite a journey to go on. But I want to unpack, I think, what P you're talking about here, and just this overall sentiment of, the buzzwords and marketing terms that get thrown around. And Chris, I'm curious how much of that is perpetuated in the classroom. Like, how much are you hearing about Web3 in the classroom?
In the classroom, not very much. And I actually don't think that is like across the board, across the US, in all the different academia and educational systems and business programs across the US. I do think the college I went to was a little bit special in that it was a smaller college. It was like 7,000 people, 7 to 10,000. So definitely smaller than a lot of universities. And the business department was smaller, but we were a good business department. We were the number one in Tennessee, but it was smaller, and there was a lot like more, I guess, leniency towards adopting something new like this because it was a newer school and we hadn't always been as established as we are. And there was a lot of people in the center that were making decisions on the actual like educational system that were very pro Bitcoin. And that's not the case when you look at Ivy schools, when you look at a lot of the West Coast schools. They are not like that at all. They're very pro blockchain, but they're actually very anti Bitcoin. So I think those schools, from what I can tell, are more prone to those marketing words, as you said, like Web3, and I mean, whatever the newest marketing term is. Just whatever new wrap around they've called a Ponzi scheme this time. And I think that I was a little bit more blessed to have a professor that really understood like the value add behind what Bitcoin was actually doing and didn't really get distracted by a lot of the marketing trends from cycle to cycle. But I do think, overall that a lot of the educational like findings within like the adoption of crypto and education are getting very stuck on like Web3, NFTs, stuff like that.
It's going to be, I think, a long, long road ahead of us. I want to read this tweet from Luke Groman because honestly, it made me chuckle a little bit. There were more people drafted into the MLB yesterday than there were petroleum engineers who graduated last year. The MLB is Major League Baseball, just so that you're kept up to date to what goes on in present day.
Thank you for that.
Of course. Always looking out for you. Look, I grew up in the generation that idolize my athletes. I still do. I wanted to be a sports agent and did that for some time. I wonder though if, these shifts in the tide when the necessity to like have people do certain jobs because we don't have enough people doing it, what effect that's going to have on our economy. Chris, you're just now kind of just getting brought into this. As you're going to quickly find out, sometimes my brain goes in places and you're just going to have to deal with it and carry this conversation with me. Did you guys ever see Interstellar?
Yes.
Of course. Fucking great ass movie.
So
Great movie.
See at the very beginning when Matthew McConaughey goes in to meet with the teachers and they're explaining how we need your son to be a farmer because we need farmers. We don't need more astronauts. We need more farmers. How likely do you think something like that could happen in our near future, in our lifetime?
That's wild that you brought that up. I recently watched Interstellar and was thinking a very similar thing. When you first watch it, like 5-6 years ago, I guess when it comes out, like you don't think about that. But with the recent events, with things changing way quicker in just the macro environment in general, and just the world in general, I don't think 5 years ago any of us could imagine that we'd be talking about the things we are now. So yeah, I do think it's a possibility. I definitely do think that, yeah, little Johnny, you got to be a farmer. Sorry about it. And that is not like, I guess the forcefulness is like a bad thing. The tyrannical like ideology that we can choose from a young age, which career path like you take, is a bad thing. But having more farmers, I don't think is a bad thing. And I think that we should support like people getting more into agriculture and stuff like that, because we definitely could get into a point where like we don't have enough farmers. Nobody knows how to farm. That there weren't enough fathers that taught their sons how to take care of the cows, how to farm the seed, and I'm not well versed in farming at all. Don't get me twisted at all. But I definitely learned a couple things from my dad, and I wasn't the type of kid who sat on an iPad. The kids I see these days, I mean, like they are glued to their iPads or their phones. I didn't get a phone until I was a freshman in high school. So, but there's like I've seen like 5-year-olds like just glued to the iPad, and like I along with you, I'm very curious like what exactly that is going to lead like the generation below me into.
Well, I do want to jump in there because I think, a lot of other countries don't have the sort of, I would say, like hand wavy bullshit of like, you can if you can dream it, you can be it, and there'll be a job for you in the future. I actually think that's super damaging. And, in, Great Britain, in England, and in many other places, you have like your A levels, your B levels, your C levels, whatever. And if you don't pass certain tests, then you basically don't get to progress. Now, I think that is a problem for very different reasons, right? But the idea that anybody can be anything at any time is actually super damaging. And I think that we are going to see people, the narrative in the US, I think, is going to shift. And that's the thing, right? It's all about narratives. When the US dollar, it still is the strongest currency, the world reserve currency, but that's not going to last. Within our lifetimes, there'll be something else, I think. And as soon as, we're going to start seeing more and more, U.S. soil psyops that are basically trying to drive people towards doing the things that our economy needs the most. Now, separately, doing the things that are going to get you money and that the economy needs the most is not a bad thing. But you're going to start seeing very deliberate efforts to shift the narrative and the sort of popular opinion that like it is honorable to be, a blue collar worker. Whereas right now, that is viewed, in previous times in our history, that was viewed, and I would argue is a super respectable class of jobs that need to be done. But I believe that very soon you're going to start seeing, as jobs start being less becomes less economic to outsource them, you're going to see a major push to get people back into like trades. And I just think that's a very interesting thing that we're going to see.
So I
have a question about
wait,
that.
I want to rip P's argument apart real quick, because I only agree with half of it. The half I agree with is actually, I'm going to start with the half I disagree with. I actually don't think it's a bad thing that we push forward the idea that anyone can become anything they set their mind to. As you've mentioned, like most countries don't afford you that freedom. The issue I have, and this is actually a long-standing thing that I dealt with in my previous job as an agent in Hollywood, you can actually point to historically certain TV shows and movies having a net effect on job interest and job applications directly as the next generation would grow up. Examples of this include when The West Wing came out, the generations that followed that became far more interested in entering the political space, and the poli-sci a major in poli-sci at undergrad drastically shot up. Another great example that I'm a byproduct of, quite frankly, is Jerry Maguire and being a sports agent. That movie comes out, all of a sudden, like the idea of being a sports agent is now put into the zeitgeist and people are interested in this. The larger issue, however, is unfortunately we have in this society really held up onto this pedestal athletes and entertainers and musicians to a point where when people hear or when people tell kids, you could be anything you want. And then the things that we in our culture and our society admire are these athletes and these musicians and these actors or actresses or artists, instead of admiring the scientists or, the engineers or the mathematicians who built out the systems and the technologies so you can appreciate the high definition slam dunk contest, or you can see the latest Marvel movie and all the greatest CGI. So that shift, I think, will trigger a change in human psychology in this country and in this culture. Unfortunately, as the Elvis movie will yet again prove to the producers in Hollywood, like those things sell. The idea of like Giannis Antetokounmpo had his own Disney movie made. Tom Brady had a documentary made, and he still plays in the goddamn NFL. Like, we have slowly shifted the goalpost for what is deemed excellence in your related field lower and lower, so long as your field has the most eyeballs to garner. So my call to action that, quite frankly, probably got me driven out of Hollywood to begin with is, can we stop making movies that perpetuate the idea of being an athlete is the end all be all, or being a famous rock star is the end all be all? It really needs to be telling these stories of women and men who have made incredible feats that maybe went under the rug. Like, perfect example of this is Hidden Figures, and how those women actually played such an instrumental and key role in space exploration. But the truth is, like, the average person didn't know that story. They didn't realize like Black women actually had a place in helping push forward space travel and exploration. And that will now garner more interest from a community to say like, it's possible. So that is where I think ultimately our culture is a little stuck, and we hold onto this pedestal, these entertainers, if you will, and have our younger generations aspire to just be that, rather than letting them see what else is actually beneficial to society. We don't need more pro basketball players. To be honest, I'm so fucking sick of the NBA. I love basketball. I fucking hate watching the NBA now, because while every team may have a superstar, their superstars are not the superstars of yesteryear. Give me Tracy McGrady versus Vince Carter. Give me Kobe Bryant versus
like an
AI.
Old ass man.
Any day. I know. And to be honest with you,
two things that'll never happen: man on the moon and the NBA being good again.
I will stop talking to Chris. I will let you ask your question to P. There was a commercial when I was a kid that I don't know why it became a core memory, but it did. It was a Sprite commercial, and it was Kevin Garnett, Tim Duncan, and one more guy. I want to say Grant Hill. They were in this commercial and like playing a game of pickup, and they got sent back in time to what like old school basketball was, like grimy, dirty, but these guys weren't getting paid money. But they really built the sport up to be what it is, so that guys like Kevin Garnett and Tim Duncan, Kobe Bryant, even fast forward to LeBron James and Steph Curry, could get these $50 million a year contracts. But then in this commercial, they took Tim Duncan and Kevin Garnett to the future and showed them like this shitty universe of like, this is what the future looks like, where like people are influencers more than they are basketball players. And unfortunately, that reality has kind of come to pass and we're living in it. And basketball has unfortunately deteriorated as a result. All right, I promise no more sports talk. Chris, you can talk now.
Yeah. So, I love that point. P, I just wanted to ask, so like we're talking about this push, right? Where does this push, in your opinion, come from? Like to the grainy detail of like, if you can name names, name names. I love going into detail about these pushes because I feel like often we skim the like surface of, oh, they are pushing this agenda. Well, who is they, right? So like, where is this push coming from? What do you think about all this?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, obviously, as we all know, the they are the lizard people that live within the flat earth, which is balanced on top of the hollow earth. Don't ask how it balances. It just does. It's turtles, right? It is a great point, right? There's this nebulous like conspiracy theory bullshit that's sort of like, like the aforementioned they. And I think a lot of conspiracies are ridiculous, but there are, there are very concerted efforts, just like we saw with the amount of effort that went into figuring out how to craft the vaccine narratives, right? So these are not people who are, I think there are definitely nefarious agendas that are being pushed, right? We can talk about like the World Economic Forum, like fucking Davos, like every soundbite you find from those groups, it's like, oh, sweet Jesus, like this sounds like some dystopian bullshit, right? So like those people, now, by the way, none of those people, I mean, maybe some of them do, but I would argue that 99% of those people, we should have a bingo card, I'm realizing, where it's how many times has P said 99.9 or 99%, because I say it all the time. The point is, 99.99% of people that are in those groups do not think of themselves as villains, right? No one is the villain in their own story. These are not people who are like, we are going to, collapse the social structures that have been built over generations in order to complete this nefarious goal. No, these are people who basically they're asking themselves in the same way that for a long time it was like, and still is, I would argue, how do we get more people interested in STEM fields? Because, it's really important. We need to be encouraging kids. And I think that's a fucking great objective, right? And so in the same way, as manufacturing jobs start coming back to this country, which honestly I think is a fantastic thing, I believe we're going to start seeing those similar narratives being pushed. Now, in terms of who is pushing them, I think the example that I'm using here is actually going to be fairly organic in the same way that the White House has a task force. This, I'm pretty sure this is true, around like how to get more kids interested in STEM. In fact, it probably already exists, but there's going to be task forces that are focused on some of these other issues. So it doesn't actually have to be nefarious. I'm not saying that there's like some like shadowy cabal, there probably is, trying to fuck stuff up. It's like, I think having more manufacturing jobs in the US is good. I think a lot of the changes that we're going to see where we stop outsourcing as many things are good, but I'm just pointing out that there's going to be this large narrative shift. And I think that those narrative shifts in terms of what is considered acceptable to talk about in politics, anytime those things shift, it's very interesting to me. So the short answer is, I don't know exactly who these people are, but narrative manipulation happens everywhere.
And this is more to prompt a discussion, but first is why, like what effect will, in your guys' opinions, having manufacturing return stateside have on the cost of goods in general? And B, is this just a short-term solution for the inevitable robot overlords to come and just take over all of these manufacturing jobs?
I'm not going to be able to give you a real answer to that question.
Well, P can't because he's compromised by AI. If you guys didn't know, P is actually 3/4 AI.
It's true. It's true.
This is how he's lived for as long as he has lived.
It's true. I'm a Highlander. Everybody knows
that. Let's start with the first part, because whether or not you buy the argument was made that the cost of labor is cheaper in these other countries, so that's why these businesses moved it there. So if that's the case and the cost of labor does now increase, no business out of the goodness of their heart is going to keep prices the way they are. If I've learned anything over the last years, they're just going to keep raking them higher. So is that something that's going to be sustainable for our economy, given where we're at with the inflation today?
I am not
happening.
I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in macroeconomics, but I think one of the things you mentioned is that the incentives are going to drive certain outcomes, and I think that's a good thing. I actually think that the governments around the world are regularly trying to manipulate markets, right? We have this illusion of a free market. We have this illusion that we are a free capitalist society. That could not be farther from the truth. Well, it could be farther from the truth, but it's certainly not true when we talk about equities, stocks. We talk about the price of certain goods in this country, right? Corn is massively subsidized. That has all these knockdown effects. I would like to see us live in a world where free market forces are allowed to actually drive towards economic outcomes that fill those niches. I think that would be a super positive thing for everyone involved. And I don't know what the immediate impacts of things eventually being pulled back onto US soil. But I think it's good in terms of making us more robust and allowing us to be less dependent on other countries, less susceptible to economic warfare. I think those are good things, but I know you could drive like a fleet of semi trucks through the gaps in my knowledge when it comes to the specifics of manufacturing processes. Chris, as an expert in manufacturing processes, can you give us the rock solid, undeniable answer to this question?
Yeah. How much percentage increase should we be expecting the cost of goods as a result of this manufacturing shift?
We're going to hold you to this, by the way.
Okay, well, y'all can give me a break on all that.
We're
but
fucking with you. We're fucking with you.
The correct answer is 69.420%.
Zero.
But all right, fine. Let me ask an easier question. What is the general population going to say should the cost of goods go up and businesses' response are, well, this is what happens when we move manufacturing back stateside? What is the response going to be from the masses? And what is the response going to be from the federal government? Speculating.
Well, on the response, but I think it's important to think about this. So when the original shift happened of everything going out of our country, going out of our borders, the reason was, like you said, that labor was cheaper, thus meaning that the labor was a very depictant factor on how the business succeeded. So the labor was a huge cut of costs and a huge part of the business actually succeeding. So in order to bring that back, the labor, the benefit of the business bringing it back, and the labor that provides has to be greater than the labor and the cost and the benefit of the business than taking it out of the state. So what I think that we will see is the coincide of man and automation. And that will actually, because you can't, I guess, force the US to adopt that the labor, right, is going to be the same, and people are going to want the same money as people who do the same job in China or India or any other country where labor is cheap, because the US doesn't have that type of theology, that ideology. People will not subscribe to that. People are not down for that. But if the labor actually was cut, and the actual importance of each job was increased, and the actual productivity of each person that you hired was increased and X greater than what you were saving on labor outsourcing that same job, then that would automatically pull the jobs back. So let me give an example. If for every eight I guess outsourced jobs, however much productivity that they can produce, if you can produce that same amount with one person in the US, then they are going to be willing to pay the US person 8 times more because it's the equivalent of the productivity for that business. So when we start to coincide automation and man, and as technology advances, I do think that that shift will happen. I just don't really know how that looks, and I don't know how that's going to play out. But yeah, I think that's what needs to happen.
I guess I can accept that. Not happily, but more begrudgingly, I'll accept that. Where do we go from here? Economically speaking, of course, we got a 9.1% interest rate reading. No, inflation reading. Jesus. I actually didn't smoke weed yesterday, so I don't really get what's going on here. We have our FOMC meeting next week as well. 75 to 100 basis point rate hike. We are in the end of times. Chris, how does it? What?
Hardly. No. These are not the end of times. People have lived through so much worse.
Okay, let me rephrase. This is the end of times for our generation as we know it, as we have come to know the world.
We haven't seen shit yet. I give it 2 weeks before people are eating their own children, setting everything on fire. Mad Max. It's gonna be wild. No, I'm kidding. Of course, that's not gonna happen in 2 weeks. It'll be at least 3. Go ahead, Chris.
Well, I guess I'll respond to that question with another question. Do you, Q, think that anarchy and I can burning everything down, do you think that that is inevitable in like the macro environment we are in now?
I unfortunately take the side of, in order to take the power away from those who hold power, they're not going to give it up without force. I do, however, believe that there can be other ways to exert force that are not in the physical space. We talk a lot about voting with your dollar. I genuinely believe, should the Bitcoin economy itself start to grow, and what do I mean by that? I mean the day-to-day transactions of Bitcoin start to go beyond just, oh, people are buying on exchanges, and it's starting to look like, oh, there's enough Bitcoin set up on Lightning channels to facilitate enough payments to compete with the likes of Visa and MasterCard. There are enough wallets now to compete with the size and the scope of the entire global banking system. We now have a fraction of the total global banked population now has their own Bitcoin wallet. I do actually believe these type of events are going to have a drastic effect on fiat world and the approach that a lot of the current powers that be have. I don't believe that a full-fledged war that will cause more harm than good will be in the betterment of humanity and society. We have seen historically that there are two larger issues that I have with the idea of going to a civil war in present day. The first being that in historical context, when you've had a gold standard, there was a limit on the amount of time you can be in war. When we entered World War II and the countries that were involved in the battle all agreed at the same time to remove themselves from the gold standard and just have this sort of unlimited money to spend and keep the war machines going. It was a very dangerous proposition that ultimately crippled Germany and allowed for the war to end. I don't think there's no end like that could be possible if we were to enter some sort of a civil war, civil disobedience. Like, there's too much infighting amongst citizens first for us to band together to then fight the powers that be, that they would just sit in their ivory towers and just laugh at everyone fighting amongst themselves over the fact that, oh, they're fighting over someone not wearing a mask, and they're fighting over this right, they're fighting over that right. Excellent. That's genuinely what I think they're trying to puppeteer. That's why you kind of get like conspiracy theory hat on. I'm a huge stoner, if you didn't know that. I'm very big on believing that not only should weed be decriminalized by the federal government, I do think we should retroactively go back and start to release any nonviolent criminals who were involved in weed. You don't have to agree with my belief. That is just what I genuinely believe and what I would like to see changed. There is a constant conversation around the legalization of weed in DC. There's not a consistent conversation around the processes around our healthcare system. We hear a lot about let's create some change in our healthcare system. Let's create socialized medicine. Let's attack the pharma companies for how much they charge. But there isn't a deep, thoughtful conversation out of DC about what do these changes constitute. But there is actually a strangely thoughtful conversation around the nuances of legalizing a class 1 narcotic in the eyes of the federal government. And why is that? Because our attention is there. And they think that if they say what we want, that we'll be satisfied and we won't pester them for more, and they'll be good with, hey, we gave them an inch. We're not giving them a foot. We gave them the inch and leave them be. So I unfortunately think it will come to some sort of a conflict. I hope it won't be violent, because I don't think a violent conflict will actually help perpetuate humanity or society forward. I think it will pull us further back. Just me on my own. I said so many things that triggered P and Chris that they left. Oh, they're back.
No, totally. I do think that this is important, I guess, to mention that we are going about this in a way where we are dependent on that conversation happening in DC. And I think a lot of the Bitcoin ethos that I personally subscribe to, and I think a lot of other Bitcoiners subscribe to, is that we want to pull that conversation out of DC. We don't want to settle with, oh, they finally have listened to this conversation 1 out of 100, 1,000 times that we've been saying that they need to talk about it. We want to make their voice invalid, right? Or we want to pull that conversation away from DC, because maybe for the first time ever, they finally do start that conversation, right? And they finally do make improvements. Well, now there's still 999 other issues that you still haven't addressed, that you won't even have the conversation about, which I think is very, I guess, in line with why I do subscribe to a lot of the narratives that Bitcoiners push, that isn't just about the monetary asset. It's about the freedom of individual, freedom of soul, freedom of thought, that really shows that the conversation isn't and shouldn't be depicted around a House of Representatives or a Senate or whatever that might be, or a Federal Reserve. So I definitely understand what you're saying. I love what you're saying. I think that there needs to be more emphasis on that. We're trying to change the conversation instead of getting rid of it, and giving that conversation to the people and back to the people.
P, will there be a violent revolution?
I mean, no, I don't think in the way that people are worried about it. I think it's always like a slow descent. Was it the fall of ancient Rome? Like, we can look back and see the messages that people wrote back and forth, and nobody was like, everything is collapsing right now. People just started talking about like, oh, there's more, there's a lot more robbers. There's a lot more people getting the equivalent of whatever ancient Rome style mugged on the streets and on the roads and things like that. And then it was a slow descent. I would like to think, and I am super optimistic for the future of this country. I think that without Bitcoin, we would be utterly fucked. I think Bitcoin, not only for this country, but for the whole world, provides a smoother ramp for us to move into the new world order. Countries and countries becoming dominant and then receding and then becoming dominant again or receding entirely. That's just the nature of human history. So I think it can all feel very personal, as it does for me, certainly, because this is the time we are living in, and this is the country that we live in. But I think that things are going to happen, and I don't think there's going to be a giant violent revolution. That's my take. Unless the lizard people come out of the ground and start stealing our children, then it will get fucked up.
I want to though talk maybe not about this growing resentment towards the government and officials, but rather this unfortunate polarization of citizens across the world. It's not just an American thing. You see it in countries all over the world. We saw it at the beginning of the year up in Canada. We're seeing it right now over in the Netherlands. Australia has had it for years now. Like, you are starting to see almost two classes of people, and it's not fair for me to categorize them as simply as those who adhere to what the government is saying and those who challenge what the government is saying. But for simplification purposes, I want to classify them as such. Do you think we run the risk of infighting? Not necessarily fighting to end the power or the control of the government, but rather the infighting of my idea is better than yours. You are stupid. You're not listening to me. I get angry, so now I will use violence instead of words. Do you think that that is a growing fear or sentiment in this country?
Yeah, I want to say yes, but I also don't want to say yes, because I think there's a few factors there that kind of are dismissed in general. And the first is that we went through a period of time that was very different than most of history in the world. Most of history in the world has been, it's very natural for a group of humans to subsidize in different classes, with one thinking they're better than the other, one thinking that they deserve more than the other. And subscribing to that ideology would not be a new thought. It would be the repetition of history over and over again. So when you look at the infighting, I guess maybe I would like a little bit more clarity on like what exactly like your question is with that. But I think that when you look at the classes across the world, and like you think like each culture is different, right? But the overall mechanism of the splitting from class to class to class is not a country to country thing. It is a human nature thing. It's very, I guess, instilled in our DNA and who we are, and that when you have an edge against somebody, it is more common for the human to take that edge than to not. And I believe that is historically backed. And I don't think that there is like a good avenue to actually go about changing that.
P.
No thoughts.
What
My
a
head is
thoughtful
empty.
response. What a thoughtful response.
A goblet that has been emptied on the ground.
I will say this, Chris. Like, I think my sentiment is exactly like yours. Like, I want to say no, but I think unfortunately it may come to pass, and it may not come to pass across the whole country, but in little pockets here or there. And we saw it in 2020. You saw people who were protest whatever they believed in. They were met with counter protesters. Whether you were protesting for BLM, whether you were protesting for Thin Blue Line, whether you were protesting for the right to be outside, like everyone was met with these counter protesters. And it's unfortunate that we as a society have lost the idea or ability to accept our opinions as just that, as opinions and beliefs. And we get stuck on this idea that our opinions are superior to others and try to jam it down everyone else's throats. And if your opinion differs from mine, we therefore we can't have a civil discourse or a conversation about this. We must be enemies all of a sudden. I don't believe that. I quite frankly know for certain I don't align with most of the political beliefs as many of my friends, but that doesn't change my friendship or my relationships with them. It honestly fosters, in my opinion, a deeper connection because we are able to have thoughtful conversations and hear each other's perspectives without an intention of changing each other's minds or of it getting to a point of anger and hostility. That's to say that my opinion and my approach is better than yours, so everyone should do it my way. Like, I know how stupid I sound when I say it, but I urge everyone to just, I think, have a little bit more empathy and compassion rather than this steadfast and almost rock solid belief in whatever it is you believe. Because let me tell you, what you believe is probably wrong and it's shaped by your environment and your past, and we're all biased to a fault.
Do you think that across the world whole that this moment in time that the average human being has less empathy than any other time in the world? Or do you
Ooh.
think that is a trend that we can't really like there is no data behind how much the average human has of empathy or sympathy or different emotional characteristics. There is no data behind that. But there is books, there is writing, there is first person encounters and narratives of writing that people have written. Do you think that that has
So,
changed? Do you think that is a constant?
so you're absolutely right. There's no real data to say like, oh, empathy and compassion has grown or decreased over this time period. There is nothing like that. But there are ways that I like to at least sort of point out to calculate them. And I think one of the easiest things to point out is values. And I think historically speaking, there were a lot more values around community, family. The idea of like going to another country was like unheard of unless you had the means to do so. And if you were, it wasn't, and it was very rare for a single individual to go off and do that. It was typically a family would go, or at least one member of the family would go to lay roots, and then the rest of the family would kind of come. I don't, to be honest, like I don't think there is an accurate way to say there's more or less empathy. We can definitely say the world is more interconnected, and I think we all at some point or another kind of scroll through our social media or get sent some sort of an update, one that shows the kindness of humanity and one that can show the deplorable side of humanity. And I get into this debate with my girlfriend all the time. Like, yeah, the world sucks. The world sucks when all you see are the shitty sides of humanity. But the world is this incredible, beautiful place when you see the beauty in it and you see the compassion and the togetherness of different groups of people banding together, or just the way people are willing to put up with and go through hell for the sake of their children, or the sake of their families. It's all perspective. It truly is just up to the individual. Your dog is adorable. But it to me is just rooted around this idea of personal bias and having this notion that what I believe must be true. And if something comes across my line of sight and it doesn't adhere, doesn't fall in line with what my perspective is, then it's cast out as a fallacy. It must be a lie. It must be misinformation. It must be fake news. Fuck that. Fuck that. I'm so sick of the echo chambers, which is partially why I tend to take the other side of the argument in a lot of these conversations that we have here. It's not because I believe those things, but it's because I want to at least like have a deeper and thoughtful conversation around them. And I think it's important because otherwise we're no different than the likes of CNN or the likes of Fox that just perpetuate an echo chamber of one opinion and one perspective and validate it and continue to validate it. That is what's wrong, and that is what's causing this division in our society, rather than an openness and a curiosity to get a spectrum of information.
I do think that that idea is newer to the world than people might think. the world used to be very, very monarchical, and that there was one ruler who did not appreciate a debate at all. And the rise of the philosophers, the rise of people like Aristotle and Plato, and you name it, that actual shift of accepting debate, accepting disagreement, and learning from that historically isn't back to have always been encouraged. Um, so we did do that shift. Do you think that we have increased that, and now we have hit that climax? Do you think we have hit that top of encouraging that, and we are now going back towards a more encouraged society on hushing your opinion and just accepting the current thing? Or do you think we still have more to go when it comes to debating each other, encouraging each other to think deeper and differently about ideas?
So I think I'm now seeing the issue of where we're going with this conversation, and we're trying to encapsulate it on a totality system, where, you know, as a percentage of the population, it has been a diminishing percentage that has this. I'm assuming we're talking still about empathy and compassion, and this desire to like find a real truth around topics. Like, I think the peak of that, I've never lived through it. That has not been in my lifetime. The peak was somewhere in the past. And it depends on how you want to measure it. Because if you want to measure it just on the basis of the total number of people seeking out that truth, we're technically at the peak right now, based strictly on the fact that the global population has continued to expand. So there are more truth seekers today alive than there have ever been historically. However, the proportion of truth seekers to the total population has diminished, in my opinion, with no factual basis, just me talking out of my ass. So I think when you start to break that dichotomy down a little bit more, I think the issue that you and I'm jumping to a conclusion. If this is not how you feel about it, correct me if I'm wrong. The idea that the general population and the total percent of the population that are truth seekers, that being a diminishing fact in today, in present day, that is the larger issue, because the non-truth seekers are so overwhelmingly vocal about their perspective that it almost makes people who want to actually question or doubt the status quo almost be shunned. Like, I was one of the most vocal anti-Trump people, due in large part because he continued to attack personally my family and my heritage and my homeland. So I had a personal issue with some of the policies that he was pushing through. But let me be perfectly fucking clear. I have just as many issues with Joe Biden, and I am not shy of voicing them to him. Mind you, to him, I mean via Twitter. So I think, go ahead, P.
I was going to say, jumping all the way back, you guys are pontificating on some very lofty topics. I just want to go all the way back to, you were asking a question about empathy, like human empathy, the amount of empathy that is in the world today versus previous times. I actually would argue that there is not a significant change there. There are, there are a number of studies that show that we evolved as tribal creatures, right? There are different organisms that evolved to be more, kind of lone wolf style, but there were selection pressures as we evolved over time that drove us to be in these small groups, right? There's individual selection pressures. I'm talking about evolution. There's group level selection pressures. There's larger group level selection pressures. And studies have shown that there are a certain number of people that you can hold in your brain and maintain sort of actual personal relationships with. And when you go beyond that number, you stop being able to kind of process their individual desires and needs and empathizing with them. And so I think what is actually happening is, because of the magic of the internet and the world that we live in today, the number of people that you can interface with has increased dramatically. And so there are more people that we are less compassionate with because our brains are just not structurally wired that way. And I think you can improve that, but it takes effort and conscious thought. And so I think that's what we're kind of coming up against. And I think that's just, a biological or biologically driven issue. But I don't think that's necessarily a terrible thing. I think it's just something that we have to be aware of and, not fall into the trap that can potentially create.
I think
You're
another
wrong.
trap that can be created. Sorry to cut you off, Q. Just a short thought on this, kind of piggybacking off what P said, but the idea of going back to the debate thing, the encouragement of debate. I think we can all agree that that is good. Encouraging public debate, encouraging discourse, that improves society, that makes society better. I think there is a trap though that I think I've fallen into this trap before. I feel like especially with Bitcoiners, a lot of Bitcoiners might have fallen into this trap before due to the doom and gloom aspect of coming into the space and realizing that some things that you realize when you come into the space are not what they seem to be. And so like when you encourage debate, I guess when I first like began to really enjoy and encourage debate, I lost the sense of optimism when I first started that. And I think that is a trap that isn't good to fall into. And I think that proper like due diligence on that, there can be debate and also be optimism as well. I think that there's a lot of pessimism that goes with debate, that a lot of doom and gloom, a lot of pessimism, like I said, but there is optimism through debate. And I think that lining is hard to see sometimes. And I think that's another trap along with it as well.
There is a maximum number of people who can take your time and your bandwidth, but it costs you nothing to be kind to a perfect stranger. I will leave you all with that and a reminder to buy your tickets to Bitcoin Amsterdam. Ticket prices will be going up next Friday. How much will they cost starting next Friday, Chris?
That is to be determined on supply and demand.
100 million sats. No, more than that.
You had one job.
Hey, but it shouldn't matter what they're gonna be because they need to buy them now. Right now they're 249 euros. So it does. So don't. It doesn't matter what it's gonna be in a week. Go buy your 249 euro GA pass or your $3,000 whale pass today, and you don't have to worry about it. We could increase them by triple. You don't know.
Anything is possible. All right, my friends.
Get your Amsterdam tickets. I'm going to see you there.
It's going to be great.
Chris, how can people stay up to date with you? Where are you posting your latest articles and your troll account?
So I'm at Satsville on Twitter. I don't post any content that you probably would even enjoy, but if you want to follow me, you can. It's a bit random. I have no specialties at all. I work for Bitcoin Magazine, and that's about it.
Bitcoin is his personality. When you look up, when you want to actually, can someone make that a meme? Can we meme what Bitcoin as a dude's personality looks like? And it's just Chris Smith. All right, guys, we're going to cut to a commercial break and we're going to be joined by Ansel and CK for a new episode of Fedwatch. As Chris said, as we have told you, lock in your tickets to Bitcoin Amsterdam. Ticket prices will be going up next week, so you don't want to miss it. Cut to a commercial.
Peace.
What is up, Bitcoiners? We are back with another episode of Fedwatch. It's me and Ansel once again, and we have quite the update for you. We got a lot happening in the global sphere, but we are mostly going to be focusing on China before we talk about Bitcoin going all the way up. Where is Ansel, by the way? I don't see him.
I'm here. Can you see me?
Oh, there we
What's
go.
up, guys?
What's up, my man?
What's up, Christian?
Ansel, how you doing?
Good, man. Yeah, so another exciting episode of Fedwatch on deck here. Like you said, China update. Then we'll jump into Bitcoin, perhaps bottoming. So we have some Bitcoin charts, and then we'll end up with the euro. Some other admin updates for us. I started a new Fedwatch Clips channel, which I will link in the show notes to this. And as soon as I get figured out how to put longer clips onto Twitter, those will be going up as well on Twitter. But yeah, there you can see the new channel. Already have 20 subscribers. So if you're listening live, go on over to Fedwatch Clips and subscribe. And of course, driving traffic back to the Bitcoin Magazine standalone episode. But
I want to give a shout out to our new music. I'm a big
and new
fan.
music,
Good
yes.
choice. Good choice, Ansel.
Yeah, we got some new music, working on some intros to make it a little bit more listener friendly to people. Because as Bitcoin's bottoming, I think we're going to have a new flood of interest into the space, and I think making this podcast a little bit more listener friendly will be good. Hopefully, we can get our numbers up. So please, listeners, share, subscribe to the new YouTube channel, and let's get our listener base up.
So before we get into the show, I want to give a quick shill to Bitcoin Amsterdam. I heard some blasphemy on the last interview, but ticket prices are going up this Friday, so you really don't have any time. Buy your tickets right now. Ticket prices are going up, and you're going to want to get your ticket right now. It's 349 euros for the GA ticket. Sorry, 249 euros for the GA ticket. 2,099 euros for our VIP whale ticket. And it's going to be a lot of fun in Amsterdam, y'all. We have a great speaker lineup for you guys. And October is a beautiful time to be in the Netherlands. We got Alex Gladstein, Adam Back, Pierre Richard, Matt Odell, Giacomo Zucco, I can't pronounce Nook's last name, but Lena Shees and many more to be announced. So working on some big names over at Bitcoin Amsterdam. So go get your hotels, get your flights, get your tickets. It's going to be a great time. And for those who are concerned, all the main content will be in English. So for the Americans, great time to go to vacation, great time to go to Europe. You could even do a Bitcoin Europe tour between Riga, what's happening in France, and then in the UK. And then finally, what we're doing in Amsterdam. A lot of Bitcoining is happening in Europe. And gosh, they need it. They need Bitcoin in Europe more than most developed countries. So don't forget to go to b.tc/conference/Amsterdam. Get your tickets today before ticket prices go up on Friday. Ansel, you went to Jackal Island. What was that like?
Yeah, so yesterday went to Jekyll Island, famous in the economics sphere, I guess you could say, people that study the Federal Reserve and stuff like that. That's where the bankers got together back in 1910 to design the current central bank of the United States, or Federal Reserve. And I just lived down the road. So I moved to Florida, Jacksonville area about 3 years ago, and I wanted to go visit Jekyll Island. And I went there for the day with my family and got to teach my kids all about the Federal Reserve. And hey, this is where it was kind of created in the shadows. And yeah, we visited the Jekyll Island Club. Very, very nice place. That just to give a little example, they had a croquet field, manicured croquet field, and people playing in all white. So that's the type of club resort that it is there. They also have a golf course and all that. But yeah, it was interesting to go see that.
You know, Jekyll Island is the birthplace of all of this fiat madness. So I think it's important for people to know about the history. There's a great book called The Creature from Jekyll Island. So I really recommend everyone to go check that out. And it's important to know history. I'm here in Nashville. The other day, I was actually hanging out with my wife's uncle, and he is a huge history buff, and he had been touring all around the South, checking out Civil War battlefields and other memorials there. So knowing history is so important because it helps guide you how things might happen into the future. Of course, it doesn't always repeat, but it sure often does rhyme. And there's a lot of lessons and wisdom from history. So I think it is really important for people to understand what happened in the past. And hopefully we can avoid remaking those mistakes. But, I'm not that hopeful that we'll avoid all those mistakes. Human beings tend to have a pretty short memory.
Well, yeah. Also, if you guys want to see the images from my trip, you can go to join the Telegram group. It's Bitcoin and Markets. Just search for it. I will link to it in the show notes too. Trying to get that bootstrapped, a new Telegram channel for people, and you can see all the manicured lawns and all the hoity-toity people that go to Jekyll Island Resort. But yeah, it was a fun trip. Should we jump right into China now, or what do you want to do?
Yeah, I was going to say, let's pivot from talking about what's happening in the U.S. and let's talk about China. A lot is happening in China.
Absolutely. So the Chinese housing market continues to struggle. We talked about this, probably the first in Bitcoin for sure, maybe one of the first in macro podcasts to talk about Evergrande and some of the real estate troubles over there in China. It continues to expand. Now, out of the top 100 developers, real estate developers in China, 28 have either defaulted or restructured their debt. And probably the other 72 out of the top 100 are in trouble, right? You can't have the top 2 real estate developers defaulting and the rest of the market is going to be okay. So it's a real big problem over there. Let's see, the mortgage boycott. So recently, you probably have seen some headlines about this. It started small with about 20 projects, 20 of these high-rise projects where the new owners are boycotting making payments on their mortgages. So through COVID and through this credit crisis that they're having now, these projects aren't even being built actively anymore. And the way that they usually do it over there in China, from my understanding, is that they pre-sale all of these units and then they build them in a couple years and then they can move in later. But now all these developments have stopped being built and there is a mortgage boycott. So like I said, it started with about 20 projects and it has now increased to 230, at least 230 of these high-rise projects have joined this mortgage boycott. And out of all mortgages in China, it's still small, about 0.1% of all mortgages. So they say it's about 100,000 households are refusing to pay these mortgages. But it is a little bit higher in the mortgage value. So about 1% of all mortgage value in China is boycotting making payments. And it's growing. So,
well, the thing is that when the way that the fiat system is set up and the amount of leverage that's in the system and the amount of kind of dependencies that are out there, it's like, yeah, it's 1%, but if that becomes 5%, then all of a sudden it becomes a systemic problem because that's how fragile it all is.
Yeah, and some of the rhetoric is extremely similar to 2007 in the United States, where they say, oh, it's a small problem. It's contained to a small segment of the market. It's not going to affect things. I mean, it's kind of eerie, the similarities in what the officials are saying about this problem. And real estate's huge in China. It makes up about 25% of their GDP. 20% of bank assets are real estate assets and like mortgages and stuff. And the Chinese banks have a total of about $9 trillion worth of exposure to the real estate sector. So it's the biggest, the real estate sector in China is bigger than the United States stock market. And it's facing a credit crisis. So this could really affect the global economy. Let's see, I do have a chart here. And that's the second one, or slide number 3. Is that, sorry, I'm not watching the screen. Is that up on the screen now? There we go. Okay.
We've been looking at this chart the whole time.
Sorry, I was looking at my notes. I wasn't looking at the screen. So this shows that we are in the 10th month in a row of negative prices for new units over there in China. And what struck me about this chart was the kind of cyclicality you can see in the preceding years, where it looks like towards the second half of the year, the housing market cools off each year in China. And I'm not sure if that has to do with the flood season, the wet season, or maybe the Chinese New Year or something. But it does look like at the end, the second half of the year slows down. And so that's a bad sign if already at the beginning of the year, we're in negative territory for the real estate market over there. It could just continue to get worse. The next slide I have is the Chinese GDP. And Christian,
You
of
hate to
course,
see
stop
the
me.
lower lows, man. Scary.
Yeah, Christian, just stop me anytime.
Keep going. Keep going.
Break me off, because I can just keep rattling this stuff off. So, this is a chart of GDP and CPI. The CPI is not all that important for our discussion here, but the GDP had a print last quarter, so Q2, of 0.4%. And what struck me about this chart is you can see from the great financial crisis back in 2008, it's been trending downward. And that's part of my whole macro theory is we're just going to return to low growth, low inflation environment. And China is kind of leading the way possibly in this. We did have, of course, the disruption there with COVID, but now we're just returning to a slowly having lower growth, including in China. So any comments on this chart, Christian?
I mean, it just it's interesting to see it all just all together, right? So the trend is kind of intact, and outside of just COVID, it's just been getting less and less and less. So seeing that stagnation is kind of crazy. You've been talking about how China has been fueled by all of this debt that has kind of been circulating, and as that unwinds, who's the first victim? It's China, and you can see in the chart.
Absolutely. So this year they have a 5% goal for GDP. And if they want to achieve that, the second half of the year has to be a 7% growth rate. And it does not look like they're anywhere close to getting that. But you also have to think about a little bit larger perspective on this, because they have the 20th Party Congress coming up later this year. And that is where Xi is going to be crowned Emperor of China, pretty much, where he is going to be perpetually at the head of the CCP. And if they're facing really bad financial crisis as well as crashing GDP, when is he going to get crowned? Is he going to get the next term as chairman of the Communist Party? We'll see. But this is an important year, and I don't know, if I were his political enemy, I would just not try to fix anything, not get in the way, and let it all collapse. So I think that there is some argument to be made for China to really experience a big financial crisis from a political perspective, not just a macro perspective. So, that can lead us.
Do you have any insight into what the political rhetoric in China is like? And I'm assuming that not everyone is just bowing down to the CCP, although obviously the techno authoritarianism is pretty powerful and scary.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert on China or anything like that, but I do know that the Xi has gone through several purges in the Communist Party, where he's really taken out any of his competition, any people that are kind of rising up and having influence. He's taken them out already, so he has very tight control over the entire country. And this zero COVID policy, I think, demonstrates that. So you've probably seen some videos of people walking on the tarmacs over there in different airports in China, and they have their suit on and they're spraying some solution on the tarmac of the airport. I don't know. I saw that the other day, and people are like, wow, this is just crazy over there. But really what they're doing is they're proving their loyalty, right? They're proving their loyalty that they will do something so ridiculous and they won't question the authorities. And so, yeah, Xi does have a tight iron grip over there, but that it's all going to come to a head later this year at the 20th Party Congress. So it will be quite exciting.
So when is the Congress again?
I'm not sure. I think October sometime, but I would have to look that up exactly when it is.
So coming
But
pretty quickly here.
Yeah, it's coming up this year. Okay,
All
the
right,
next
y'all.
story. Next story I
I was gonna
have
say,
is
hey, keep an eye out for October and in China, and we'll keep you all up to date. Next story.
yeah. So it just keeps getting worse though. Like the problem, what I want to try to build a narrative of, it's slow rolling, but it's gradually then suddenly. And another thing we're seeing over there in China recently is these bank runs. And I have an article that I wanted to read off for that. Let's make sure that's pulled up. There you go. And let's get into this. So this is by Mingji Pei. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. He's a professor of government at Claremont McKenna College. And this was in Nikkei Asia just a couple days ago. So here we go. Confidence in the safety of Chinese banks has been badly shaken by the failure of several small banks in Henan province in April this year. In terms of their assets of about 40 billion yuan, that's $6 billion, and the number of customers, roughly 400,000, the shuttered rural banks are minions in the China's financial system. So they're not that big yet, but smaller things can snowball into bigger things. The explosion of these poorly supervised and likely corruption-ridden financial institutions should not be surprising. But how local authorities handled the fallout is shocking, even for the most jaded observers of the Chinese political scene. Instead of compensating the depositors, who were entitled up to 500,000 yuan, according to government regulations, officials in Henan have done everything imaginable to silence them. They initially restricted the movement of the depositors by turning the COVID test code on their smartphones red, which effectively made it impossible for them to take public transportation or even drive their own cars. A public outcry forced the Henan government to abandon this abusive tactic. That sounds a little bit like Canada or Australia or even some European countries. Anyways, but when several hundred depositors unable to gain access to their savings in the failed banks gathered on July 10th to protest in front of the People's Bank branch office in Shenzhou, the capital of Henan, local officials sent in a large number of thugs who viciously assaulted the depositors, with uniformed police officers looking on. Ever since China began to binge on debt to fuel its growth in 2009, many have wondered how long the party could go on. And I've argued that it's been going, they didn't just start in 2009. China was built on at least 20 or 30 years of a credit bubble. To the chagrin of many bearish observers, predictions of a financial crisis have not panned out. Today, China's banking system is still standing despite a debt to GDP ratio of 264%. Perhaps because Beijing seems to be able to defy financial gravity, fewer people these days worry that its ballooning debt could unleash a systemic crisis. But there are many warning signs indicating that China may face a debt reckoning soon. Weak supervision, poor risk management, and corruption that likely drove the small rural banks in Henan into insolvency are systemic among the country's nearly 4,000 small and medium-sized banks, with nearly $14 trillion in assets. If a large number of small banks fail together, such an event could produce a chain reaction threatening the stability of the financial sector. Their counterparties and lenders, especially bigger banks, could suffer massive losses. Confidence in China's shadow banking system, through which small banks attract funds with a higher interest rate, will likely evaporate. The chances of such a financial meltdown are much higher today than before. One of the reasons that China has avoided a financial crisis in the last decade is that its economy managed to grow at a reasonably higher rate, averaging 6.8% a year from 2011 to 2020. A faster growing economy normally makes it easier to manage or even conceal the debt burden. But as the Chinese economy is now slowing down rapidly, in part due to Beijing's zero COVID policy, the debt bomb is ticking much louder. The most obvious warning light is clearly China's debt-ridden real estate sector, and that's what we talked about just a minute ago. China's debt-laden local governments are now facing grim prospects. Declining income from land sales because of this crisis in the real estate sector, and falling tax receipts are expected to cause a 6 trillion yuan shortfall, roughly $900 billion, in local government revenues this year. Local government financing vehicles that have borrowed heavily from banks or issued bonds will have great difficulties servicing their debt. And almost done here. Large banks in China are in trouble as well. They have lent tens of billions to poor countries as part of China's ambitious Belt and Road Initiative. A significant portion of their credit portfolio is likely to become non-performing as their borrowers are unable to service the debt due to the global economic downturn. The most recent economic implosion and collapse of the government of Sri Lanka will likely force their Chinese lenders to write off a large portion of the loans. If big Chinese banks themselves face rising non-performing loans abroad, they will be less able to help bail out insolvent small or medium-sized banks at home. It might be possible for China to dodge another financial meltdown this time, but if local officials have to hire thugs to attack bank customers trying to get their money back, investors should brace for far worse days ahead for China's banking sector. All right, and that does it. Christian, any comments on that?
Nothing. I have nothing good to say, man. Just it's insane to watch it happen. We've been calling it out here. We've even been calling out the pro-China rhetoric. This kind of idea that China is this rising power and the U.S. is this falling power.
Yep.
If anything, and even the likes of Ray Dalio have recently published this kind of idea. But when you look at the facts, you look at what's happening. Like, China is not thriving by any means. And I mean, it's sad. A lot of people are going to be affected, and it's really disgusting to see the authoritarian measures that have become acceptable across the world, and that's, I feel like, been perpetrated, been made popular by China. So I hate to see what is happening in the CCP. I hate seeing that getting exported, and simultaneously, it does not look like they're in a healthy position by any means.
Yeah, and I liked in that article they mentioned the Belt and Road Initiative because they have, a lot of people, a lot of commentators say, oh, yeah, China is de-dollarizing and they're being really smart with their investments, and they're going around the world and they're investing in all these places and building this Belt and Road Initiative, but they're non-performing. Okay, these countries are going to go bankrupt. They're going to seize back all of these things that China built for them, and I thought it was great that they put that in there. All right, that's all I have for China, man. Do you want to roll into Bitcoin now?
Yeah, what a past like 24, 36 hours for Bitcoin. Really ripping.
Yep.
First it was kind of like following whatever pump was happening in Ethereum, but today it's just completely overtaking it as well. So I'm kind of curious what you're seeing in the chart, Ansel.
All right, so let's pull up the next slide, please, is the Bitcoin chart here. This is a 4-hour chart. And I published this on Twitter and then again on my newsletter a couple weeks ago. And that is just showing that back in May, when we had, everyone kind of thought this might have been a bottom back in May. And then we went sideways. We had lower lows all along. Then we tried to break out of the red line back pretty much around June 1st. That failed. And then we had a lower high and that sold off. Now, this time we had higher lows, which I think is very important to mention, and higher highs. So this is different fundamentally than the last time we tried to do this. If you go to the next chart, these are just the last 3 times that are very similar. So I drew the line, the red line at the top of the bounce. So bounce off the bottom and then where we got to. And you can see that it failed back at the end of last year. Then it failed in May. But this one looks fundamentally different with higher lows and higher highs. So I do think there is a possibility that this is a fake out, but everything in the market that I'm seeing is showing that this is a real breakout and we could have bottomed for this cycle. Thoughts on that, Christian, before I go on?
Well, can you explain a little bit what you mean by bottomed? Because some people are like, oh, we bottomed and we're going up from here. And often my understanding of we bottomed is, hey, it's probably not gonna go that much lower from here. It might have some spills, but for the most part, we're gonna be consolidating here before finally making it back up.
Yeah. So yeah, by bottom I mean the low is in. That it is very possible that the low is in, and it won't go any lower from here. We might have consolidation, like you say, but this has bottomed, and you won't see major capitulation sell-offs anymore. I do watch some of the altcoin saga that's going on, with the liquidations and the bankruptcies and all that stuff from all these Ponzi schemes. And I think that we have moved past the portion where they're liquidating their Bitcoins. We're moved into the lawyer aspect of this. We've moved into the bankruptcies where there's not going to be a lot of liquidations here, forced liquidations in the market. So a lot of these cascade waterfalls that we've seen over the last few months, I think will be much less likely to occur in this environment right now. So that's kind of what I'm looking at.
Okay, well, I mean, personally for me, I'm not holding my breath. I'm preparing myself to continue to buy chop, continue to buy the blood. But if we boost up from here, I have a lot more Bitcoin than I have USD. Even after the boating accident. So, it's always exciting to see Bitcoin perform, but we're seeing other assets perform as well. So very interested to see how this is kind of tied into maybe Fed expectations or anything else that could be affecting the market.
Yeah, so if we go to the next slide, I know we're ripping through this stuff pretty quick here, but let's go to the next slide. And this is a tweet that I saw from Cuppy on Twitter, and it's showing a chart of cash positions by hedge funds. So at the peaks, it's showing that there is, in their portfolio, they're holding more cash. And it does correspond with market bottoms. So he charted this out all the way back. We are at a local high that goes back to 2001. Their hedge funds have not been more in cash, even during the great financial crisis or anything, all the way back to 2001. And what happens when that reverses, right? When they go out of cash back into the market, we can see a big time rally. He's saying here that it's going to be violent to the upside, and I tend to believe that. I think a lot of people that are talking about Armageddon and there's going to be a 50% sell off in the S&P and all this stuff, I think they're overselling it just a little bit, and it's likely, looking at this chart, that if these hedge funds do roll back into assets, which do include Bitcoin, I think we could see a major market rally here coming up. And if you go to the next slide, this is kind of what it looks like for Bitcoin. I used to call this tether dominance on my newsletter. I haven't tracked this for about a year, but this is the top part of this chart is showing stable coins divided by the total market cap of crypto. That's Bitcoin and altcoins. And you can see that at the tops, when there is a higher, when these stable coins are more dominant, then that's usually marks bottoms in the Bitcoin price. And then when it drops because they rotate out of stable coins back into Bitcoin, we see that the bottoms being local tops. And it very much does coincide with the last chart on cash position. So this is kind of the cash position for the Bitcoin market. And as that rotates back out of the stable coins and back into Bitcoin, we could see a major rally in Bitcoin. So this is just adding to the technical analysis of the chart pattern, saying we have a little bit of a breakout here, and we are in a position where the money can rotate back in to pump the price. So Christian, any comments on this? I know you're not a big TA guy.
No, but this is the kind of TA I do like, which is like comparing, the market cap of one thing to the market cap of another and seeing how it makes sense within the market dynamic. So watching this is really interesting. I would love to get the link to this trading view chart here, but it's really it is an excellent kind of like visualization and very interesting to see.
Yeah, this was from Will Clement III on Twitter. I will, of course, link to all this stuff in the show notes and have the appropriate things. So that's it, man. We can go into the dollar or the euro, unless you want to keep talking Bitcoin for a little bit.
Well, let's talk dollar a little bit. I mean, again, I think that there's two really interesting, strong, I would say like there's a dominant narrative and then there's like the counter narrative. The dominant narrative is like we're experiencing inflation, and then there's a counter narrative, which you have, really been sticking to and educating us, myself and the reader and the listeners about, which is like the strong dollar thesis and this idea that it's very difficult to see inflation, and that the way that the dollar works with debt and in the global economy with shadow banks and gray banking and euro dollars, there's a massive demand for dollars, and actually dollars are screeching up. It's very interesting to see dollars screeching up and simultaneously prices on real goods going up simultaneously. It's difficult for inflationists, at least dollar inflationists. I think it's difficult to argue that there isn't inflation across the globe, but not dollar inflation per se. So I'm going to shut up. Maybe you talk a little bit about just this strong dollar thesis in general, your thinking around that, and maybe we can go from there.
Yeah, so I don't argue that there is no money printing. There is no actual inflation, but there isn't enough to expand and grow the economy. So in a credit-based system, and this is the part that I really want to impress on people, is that we don't have a fiat system. We have a credit-based system. So all the money in your bank account or your dollar account, anybody in Hong Kong that has a US dollar denominated account, or Tokyo or Frankfurt or anywhere, they are that's debt. That's not fiat. That's someone else's debt. That's someone else. There's counterparty risk to that dollar. Those dollars exist on the balance sheets of banks. So it's a virtual currency that lives on balance sheets of banks. Now, to continue to, if you go back to the school book definition of fractional reserve banking, when you make a loan and that person needs to pay off the loan with the interest, right? So you take out $100 loan, you have to pay back $110 if there's 10% interest, say. And to do that, you need to have more than $100 in the economy. So for everyone to stay solvent in a credit-based system, the amount of dollars needs to continue to expand. So I'm not arguing that isn't happening. I'm arguing that the thing is, it's not when they do QE and they do all these other things, that's not money printing. The expansion of the credit supply, that is money printing, but it doesn't necessarily equal growth. So the economy has to grow and print more money to continue to inflate. But the overall debt burden, the overall pressure in the economy, once you get to a certain point, is deflationary. It adds a pressure on that credit bubble to deflate. And when that happens, the money supply shrinks, and we have these deflationary shocks. And that's what we experience in these financial crises, what we talked about in China, they're starting to experience right now, what we experienced back in the great financial crisis, what Europe experienced during the European debt crisis. These are deflationary moves, this deflationary pressure. And that's how this system is going to end. It will not end in an inflationary manner. Did I answer the question, Christian?
I think you did really do a good job of answering the question. And again, I think it's important too to say that when it comes to the dollar, and then when it comes to other nation state fiat currencies, they really operate differently. The dollar is like the foundation in which all of them clear value and write contracts, and then everything else on top of that is more paper. It's effectively derivative paper on top of whatever, however their economy interacts with the dollar. How do you feel about that explanation or statement?
I think that's true. I think that they will suffer higher price increases because, the entire global financial system is based off dollars. Even if they say, oh, only 60% of global reserves, which the number is about 62% of global reserves are held in dollars. That's why it's a global reserve currency. That they say, oh, well, the dollar is losing dominance, but really the dollar backs the euro, right? They hold foreign currency on the balance sheet. And that foreign currency, the most important one, is the dollar. So the dollar backs even all of its competitors. And in a system where the dollar's strengthening, the weaker economies are going to have a harder time to make ends meet, to service that debt that they owe in dollars. Because remember, all dollars are debt. And if you hold dollars, there is a debt somewhere that needs to get paid for that dollar to continue to exist. So, yeah, that's what I would say about the kind of dynamics between onshore dollars in the U.S. economy and dollars offshore, and other fiat currencies, quote unquote fiat currencies. They're credit-based currencies. All currencies are credit-based at this time. Of course, other than say Bitcoin, or if we went onto a gold standard, those are commodity-backed currencies. But all like national currencies today are based on credit. They're not technically fiat. And I want to maybe pull that apart a little bit more. So the reason why they're not fiat is because the government can't simply print money. The US government cannot print money. They actually borrow that money that they spend in government spending. So that money is coming from somewhere, right? The money is printed in a process of making a loan at a commercial bank to the economy, either bank to bank lending, or it can be bank to business lending, or bank to individual lending. That's where the money printing is happening. The government is just pulling that money forward out of savings and spending it today. So that's why it feels like there's money printing, and why there is price rises, because you have demand being pulled forward by these government entities. So that, just to clarify that a little bit.
Let's jump into this dollar chart here. I mean, again, we talked about the dollar screaming up, and I see in the comments about Bitcoin screaming up. Well, the dollar is actually screaming up. So if you look at the dollar index chart here, you can see really going parabolic. Ansel.
Yeah, and I've mentioned this on a standalone episode, I believe, with Fedwatch, where we looked at the parabolic move in the dollar, and I said, we can't tell where the top is going to be, but we know that the timing is getting close to the end of this rally, because it can't go up forever. It has to stop at some point, and it's going to stop when that gets really vertical. So we have had a pullback here recently, testing this kind of trend, this parabolic trend. I kind of predicted maybe 112, 115 on the DXY. So we might have one more push higher, but I do not think we'll see a sell-off in the dollar, because everybody needs dollars to pay their debt around the world. So I think we're just moved into a new higher range. If you zoom out on this chart, which I don't think I included, if you zoom out on this chart for the last, say, 20 years, you'll see that the dollar is just stair-stepping higher. There's volatility within a range, but then it stair-steps up to a new higher range and has some volatility there. And now it's stair-stepping up to another range. So that's what I think is going on with the dollar. I also want to point out that a lot of people say, oh, if the dollar's getting stronger, Bitcoin cannot rally, because it's, if the dollar's getting, Bitcoin is a inflation hedge, but that's not what we have seen in the history of Bitcoin. The dollar, like I said, has been stair-stepping higher, and Bitcoin has also been stair-stepping higher. It's just delayed a little bit. So that's important to mention, because a strong dollar does not mean a weak Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, in your theory, and I guess Michael Saylor and some others will also agree with the sentiment, is that we have a strong dollar and a strong Bitcoin, short to medium term future.
Yes. Another thing, the rising dollar can symbolize this dollar shortage. And that's what Jeff Schneider talks about a lot, a dollar shortage. And I like to call it just a monetary shortage. There's a shortage of money value out there, not even money units, but value of money, liquidity in the market. And so as the dollar goes into a higher range, it's stair-stepping up, it's getting stronger and stronger over the last 12, 15 years. Then there is a drought in liquid monetary value in the world. So Bitcoin can come in and fill that role. So as the dollar goes up, that's actually showing that there's more room for Bitcoin to come in and grab that unserved market niche of where the dollar isn't serving that liquidity need. Bitcoin can come in and serve that. So that's why Bitcoin and the dollar, I believe, will increase at the same time. I also think eventually gold will join. Gold has been having a rough time the last couple months, but eventually gold will join Bitcoin and the dollar going higher, because it is a monetary drought that we're living through.
So gold is coming up higher. I mean, gold is still, has it been struggling? I haven't really been paying attention, to be honest, to gold.
Oh yeah, gold is not looking good right now. It's about 10% down from the 2011 high. So if you go back all the way to the beginning of Bitcoin, gold has been down over Bitcoin's life pretty much, versus Bitcoin, of course, up tens of thousands of percent. So, but eventually that will change, because like I said, there's a monetary drought and Bitcoin is benefiting from that. The dollar's also benefiting from that, and gold eventually will join the party, but we'll see. We'll see when that happens.
So I guess like one of the big losers in, when your next chart here is euro versus USD. For the first time, in my memory, euro is effectively equal to the dollar. Do you want to talk a little bit about the significance of this, and then maybe we can talk about some of the things that are happening in Europe and why we think Europe needs Bitcoin, obviously.
Yeah, so let's see this chart on the euro. It is quite inverse to the DXY, because the largest portion of the DXY is the euro. I think it's 60 some percent, 62 or 4% of the DXY is the euro. And that parity mark was a magnet for this exchange rate. So, it was going to hit parity because all the eyes were on the parity mark, and so the market just goes where everyone's kind of expecting it at that time. I thought that was very interesting, and it bounced right there. It's having a little bit of a rally, but I don't think long term the euro is going to come back up to, say, a 120 against the dollar. I think it's also just like the dollar is stair stepping up, the euro is stair stepping down. And they also have their financial crisis going on. So if I would have zoomed this chart out, you would see that the euro struggled during the last European debt crisis, and this coming European debt crisis, it's going to struggle as well. So the Europe, a lot of people say, oh, is Bitcoin going to maybe take market share, or the dollar's the worst currency? Is Bitcoin going to take down the dollar, then take down the euro, then take down the yuan, or whatever? But no, I think the dollar is going to survive the longest out of these national currencies. And so the euro is going to go down before the dollar.
I mean, how do you look at what's happening in Europe and not match that conclusion, right? If you look at which country is more stable, which currency is clearly more in demand, both in contracts as well as, if you just look at stable coins, you're not seeing dominance in any way or relevance in any way of the euro unit amongst stable coins. You're really only seeing dollar units being relevant here. So, I mean, how do you not look at Europe and get worried? And again, how do you not look at China and get worried? Like, obviously, we haven't walked through all of the qualms and the issues that are happening in the United States. We have Joe Biden as our president. He's having his troubles as well. But, some of the structural issues that are plaguing the world, they're just not as bad in the U.S. So when it comes to which fiat is going down first, I definitely think that, or which credit-based currency is going down first. Ansel, I saw you grimace there when I said fiat. Maybe we got to take fiat out of our lexicon. But
that's not going to happen.
Credit-based fiat is going down? Which credit-based currency is going down first? I think the euro is in trouble, definitely much more than USD.
Yeah, and there's the fragmentation risk that we talked about on the show here. In Europe, they don't have a fiscal policy that ties them all together. And so they have, when the economy turns bad, the global economy goes into recession, say, then it's going to affect different countries differently. So, the more indebted countries are not going to be able to deal with higher interest rates, where the countries that are, have a more balanced debt to GDP ratio, they are going to be able to handle these economic crises better. And we see that it's getting really bad in Italy. It looks like Mario Draghi is trying to retire or out of the being prime minister, whatever his role over there in Italy is, and they're not letting him do it. Of course, there's a populist party that is trying to take over and run Italy, and that is a fragmentation risk where Italy might leave the Eurozone. The U.S. doesn't have that same pressure, and so add that on top of all the other fundamental problems with the euro dollar, or with the euro, and you can see why the euro would crash sooner than the dollar.
So I guess let's talk a little bit more about, some of the issues with Europe itself, and then we can wrap up the show. But I mean, I really do believe Europe needs Bitcoin. I think that the euro has been a failed experiment for European countries, and now you're looking at the activity that that the ECB is taking, and the restrictions on people's money, and the rhetoric from the ECB around how to kind of control and manage the population with a central bank digital currency. I really do think that the ECB is going down and Europe is going down the wrong direction. I don't know how long they're going to be able to keep it together, but I know that the longer that they continue down this direction, the worse it's going to get for European citizens. And the more Europeans are going to need to get Bitcoin, withdraw those Bitcoins, and do whatever they can to maintain their level of sovereignty. So I see people in the chat talking about financial advice. I don't think that there's financial advice. I think there's life advice. Like, life advice is, make sure you take care of yourself. Make sure you have sovereignty. Make sure that you're using the tools at your, at your disposal, and make sure that you and your family are not being put in a situation that could compromise your well-being in the short to medium term. So, there's been a lot of victims to really, really bad things happening. So what can you do to try to protect yourself? And I think Bitcoin is one of those things. So Bitcoin is absolutely one of those things. And, Ansel has been talking about, as the euro has issues, the demand for dollars and U.S. equities is going to skyrocket. The U.S. financial institutions will implement their strength, but so will Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is almost like a relief valve that is permissionless, that can be owned, and actually can be European, right? So like, American equities could never be European, but Bitcoin that is owned by Europeans, that is something that can kind of come back to and revitalize, whatever's happening there.
Yeah, and if you go back a couple episodes, I think you got to go back on the audio version of Fedwatch, where I talked about fragmentation risk in Europe, and I dove into a lot of the differences between U.S. internal fragmentation, European internal fragmentation, and then like an external global reserve currency fragmentation. And it's very interesting kind of insights that you can get from that. I think that, say Italy wants to leave the European Union, or I would say the Eurozone, right? If they want to leave the common currency, then they have to launch their own currency. But who would they have to fight? Well, they have to fight George Soros. They have to fight Klaus Schwab, all these globalists that want to keep them in there. So they will attack the currency. Any new currency that Italy launches, that it's going to be attacked into the ground by these short sellers and all that stuff. Just the same way Soros tried to take down the British pound, right? Well, that the new lira in Italy will be much easier to do that to. Well, how can they fight against that? They back it with Bitcoin, or they back it with gold, Italy does have a lot of gold. Technically, they own gold that's held in the United States, but they could easily back it with Bitcoin, and that would be a way for these countries to get out of these monetary unions that they have. The European Union. I guess if you wanted to say everyone's on a global dollar union because it's the dollar is the world reserve currency. If they want to do that, they could use Bitcoin to launch a new currency or to do something like El Salvador is doing, where they have a parallel system of US dollar and Bitcoin. That gives them a tool to fight against launching of a new currency. So I think that's a very interesting idea. Also, eventually I expect the US dollar to be backed by Bitcoin, and that could be coming up, in 10 years time. We'll have to see how this develops, but to get out of a credit bubble that is pushing down with deflationary pressure, and you can't get out of a credit bubble, then you have to go to a new currency. So that's one of my big narratives. I want to shift from an inflation narrative in Bitcoin to a deflation narrative where the only thing, as far as I can see, is low growth, low inflation in dollars, and economic crises after economic crises. And so to get out of that, you have to change the money. And that's where Bitcoin comes in. Bitcoin will change the form of the money and allow a deflationary spiral to take place. Boom.
Europe needs Bitcoin bad. The world needs Bitcoin bad, y'all. And again, like I think the best framework to think about Bitcoin is this just independent system, right? And as Bitcoin grows, its ability to support the world economy grows, and the need for it and its ability to compete with the existing traditional systems continues to grow. So I think that Bitcoin as this alternative system is very, very bullish. I think the incentives are sound. Things are aligned, and economic players are going to quickly find that using the Bitcoin technological monetary stack is going to give them much better results in the future and make them more competitive with their competitors. So Bitcoin is not to be underestimated, and obviously we're bullish. So I think when you pay attention to what's happening across the globe with these central banks, with fiat monetary policy, you can tell that there's only dead ends here. So, thank God for Bitcoin. And like I said, Europe needs Bitcoin. Europe can experience Bitcoin at Bitcoin Amsterdam, October 12th through the 14th. We got 3 days of Bitcoining for you there. And we're about to release a lot more details, including Bitcoin Week in Amsterdam and a lot more. So get really hyped about that. Ansel, how do you want to close this one out?
I just have one more thing to add. The CBDC stuff, I think Europe will try to launch a CBDC, and that's just going to add to the fragmentation risk. It's going to add to the redenomination risk of countries like Italy, maybe the Netherlands, I don't know, France, somebody breaking off and going to a new currency. So a CBDC is definitely going to push the narrative closer and closer to Bitcoin backing of currencies. And I expect that to happen in the next couple of years, that to be a major discussion topic.
Wow, CBDCs are going to be the next blockchain decentralized ledger technology. A bunch of smoke and mirrors, a bunch of buzzwords, very little will be shipped. And then the reality is going to be they're going to find that Bitcoin was the actual signal the whole time. So I think that, it started on the corporate side with blockchain technology. It ended with Bitcoin as a corporate treasury asset. And, it would be incredible to see what happens there. This is a slight slide. Jesus, I can't talk right now. A slight tangent, but Obi Nuwasu and a team of talented devs just raised $4 million to experiment and develop Fediment, which is effectively a new way to leverage Bitcoin value to create unified units in order to distribute ledger in a way, or distribute value on the internet in a privacy preserving and a little bit easier way to use. So something to think about. Maybe central banks leverage that technology as their way of coming up with some Bitcoin backed currency. Who knows? I think it is still very, very early days. But what we can say for sure is that Bitcoin is the signal here.
That's very interesting. I've seen that term Fedi Mint in some tweets and things, but I haven't dove into it. So does it really match Liquid? Because I expected Liquid to play a big role in adoption of nation states in Bitcoin. Do you have any insight on that, or should I just tell me to go look it
I
up?
mean, no, it has nothing to do with Liquid, and I am grabbing some articles. One is an op-ed by Obi Nuwasu about
Okay.
Fediment, and the other is news kind of explaining what the Fediment company and the raise is about. Both
Awesome.
of those are from Bitcoin Magazine, and Q is saying that in 1 hour they are going to have Obi on Bitcoin Magazine Spaces to talk about Fediment. Q, you should ask Obi about, would governments want to use Fediment? Is that something that might a way to make Bitcoin-backed currencies that are issued by the government? So I don't know if that's something that Bitcoiners want, but definitely a question worth asking.
I will absolutely add that to the list of questions that Ansel, your attendance at the spaces is now deemed mandatory.
Oh boy.
I tease. I'll let you two wrap up.
All right,
Well,
let's wrap this up then.
Ansel has some Spaces issues because,
Yeah.
you know, I guess Spaces just doesn't work for Androids. But y'all can find me on Twitter at @CK_Snarks. Obviously, always pushing shit with Bitcoin Magazine. Obviously, pushing Bitcoin Amsterdam right now, and soon to be pushing Bitcoin 2023. You can also find the Bitcoin Magazine in print. Censorship resistant issue is out, and you can get the collector's version of the subscription, where you get a beautiful sealed version that you can keep for all times for the future, for future appreciation, and another copy that you can put on your coffee table, read and enjoy now. So make sure to check that out as well. Get your Bitcoin Amsterdam ticket. Ansel, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, just to wrap up, you guys can follow me at bitcoinandmarkets.com. I do a free weekly newsletter there every Friday that goes over all aspects of Bitcoin, including my market commentaries and rants, price analysis, mining news, and I cover macro, sometimes altcoins in there as well. Also, I started a new Telegram channel. You can find that on Telegram. Just search for Bitcoin and Markets, or I will link down in the show notes to that. That's it, guys. Great show.
Awesome.
Great show.
Thank you both, Ansel and CK, for joining us. As CK mentioned, the censorship resistant issue is available at the Bitcoin Magazine store. Use promo code BMLive to get 10% off of that. Tickets to Bitcoin Amsterdam will be going up on Friday, so lock in those tickets. And of course, please, if you are not already subscribed to our channel, damn it, I was so close to figuring it out. I don't like the way the mirrors, but press the subscribe button down there. We have a lot of awesome content that we're putting together. I believe CK actually just released his part 6 of his series with Bitcoin Tina. So if you have not yet checked that out, be sure to check out the latest episode of that. It's an incredible podcast series that the two of them have been working up for some time. And I believe Joe Carlasari was featured on this most recent episode as well. But be sure to subscribe to our channel. Be sure to buy all the things that we tell you to buy. We'll be back tomorrow for another episode of Bitcoin Magazine Live. Have a great rest of your day, guys.